Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. Marvel. I have chat system and become Batman's teacher at start. Chapter 61. Silence echoed in the empty room, and finally, Batman said, "From that day on, everything I've done, everything I've experienced, has been for revenge. The law and the trial told me that Joe Chell killed my parents, but I knew that wasn't the case, and it took me years to give myself the ability to question the outcome. And now, it's time for the Bat to take revenge." Along with the dull evening clock of the clock tower of Gotham Cathedral, the figure of Batman disappeared. The recent changes in the Edward family have made Batman, who is constantly monitoring the entire Gotham City, discover that the Edward brothers used to be the leader of the alley where his parents died before they made their fortune, when they first came to Gotham. But now, the Edward brothers are dead, leaving only their nephew, and little Edward offended the Godfather. If Falcone is not willing to let him go, then the Edward family will cease to exist. Batman first found little Edward. He didn't need to send someone to invite someone like the Godfather, he could directly appear in the shadow behind anyone. The next day, Gotham was filled with a drowsy fog again, and later, the dusk made the hazy fog over Gotham dyed with more colors. Schiller was chatting with the priest at the door of the church. Like an authentic Westerner, he went in and out of the church on time, without appearing to be inconsistent. The priest here is very learned. He has a very deep understanding of theology. Schiller likes to chat with him about philosophy and theology. The old priest has lived in Gotham all his life. He has experienced all the eras of Gotham and knows all the stories here. The priest said, "The workers at the wharf don't come very often recently. Maybe their business has improved. I hope that is the case. God tells people that they need to use such hard work to atone for their sins." Recently, the number of merchant ships at the dock has increased, and the business of cargo ship owners has also improved. Schiller said, "I remember many years ago, there was a time when many workers liked to come here to pray, and the church was never so lively." The old priest's voice bears the unique imprint of the times, like a railway track paved from history, the old one is somewhat faded. It can be seen that they were not busy at that time, probably because there was not much business, and many people were complaining. Some people were very angry, and some had quarrels. I tried my best to dissuade them. "You are a good man," said Schiller. The old priest squinted his eyes and recalled, he said, "In those days, everything was a mess. I remember that the man who dominated the dock at that time was a man named Leaf. He was not easy to mess with, people called him Big Beard, some call him Viking. He is burly and strong, with a beard on his face, and he has more than a dozen equally strong men. They are domineering at the dock, and no one dares to provoke them. They specially collect labor protection fees and blackmail others. And then, who sanctioned them later? It's Falcone. His Excellency Godfather gave him a hard one." The priest stroked his fingers that were somewhat dry due to aging, and he said, "The Godfather should have taken over those peers, but somehow, it ended up in the hands of the Edward family." The priest shook his head and finally said, "I'm not saying that the Edward family is not well managed. Maybe, if the Falcone family took over the pier and the entire Eastern District was connected into a line, the Falcone family would be stronger than now. I often hear people say," Schiller said, "the Godfather's control of the East Side is a little weak, because he only controls some areas in the Northeast and Southeast, and leaves the most important part of the wharf." The priest shook his head and said, "Maybe he has his own plans." Schiller pondered that the things the priest told him were no secret. The reason why it was not widely circulated was because there were not many people who survived in that era. Of course, as to why the Godfather didn't control the pier in one breath, Schiller guessed that there might be more complicated disputes. After the sky darkened, Sheila said goodbye to the priest, and he walked out of the church alone. When the last rays of the setting sun also sank below the horizon, he heard the bell tower of the church above him, and there were 7 heavy tolls. In front of the church door, the priest drew a cross on his chest with his hand and whispered, "This is the death knell. God bless, your soul will be liberated." Schiller stood outside the door. He turned his head, and in the dark gray haze, he saw a black and yellow figure standing on the tall clock tower. On the other side, little Edward slumped to the ground, facing the shadow with 2 pointed ears in front of him. He said tremblingly, I only know that back then, the Godfather ended the chaotic situation in the Eastern docks. My father and uncle wanted a piece of the pie, even if they could only get a dock. But the godfather suddenly doesn't want any of them. So, our family got all 5 piers. I don't know what happened. I was too young at that time, you can only ask the godfather, I really don't know anything. After the shadow of the bat left, little Edward got up from the ground trembling all over. He cursed in a low voice, and suddenly he saw another shadow appeared in front of him. He looked up and saw a huge umbrella facing him. Behind the umbrella, a sullen eye was staring at him. Just as Edward was about to scream in fear, his vocal cords were cut off along with his throat. After a slight soft sound, the sound of heavy objects falling to the ground was accompanied by the lights that went out in Edward's old house, and everything went quiet. In the end, Batman came to Falcone's mansion, which was dark and quiet as if no one existed. Unlike Edward's old mansion, which was brightly lit and guarded all night, the mansion where the godfather of Gotham lived seemed to have no defenses, and Batman knew this was abnormal. Finally, Batman saw him in Falcone's office. There was still no one here. Falcone seemed to be waiting for him, sitting alone in the office in the early morning. I knew you would come, Falcone said. You weren't careful enough with old Edward's resume. That means there must be something special about his resume that deserves your attention, Batman said. Indeed, are you interested in hearing stories from many years ago? Then, Batman learned from the Godfather who had ruled Gotham for 40 years, the turbulent era he had never seen and heard of. Quote, They are friendly and ruthless. Among them, the Viking pirate Leif is the most powerful. I know very well that if I want the Falcone family to truly gain a firm foothold here, I have to use him. The bearded man made a lot of money by extorting the owner for many years. He was not convinced and wanted to resist me. So, I killed all his family in front of many people, and then stuffed him into a powder keg. Of course, that frightened a lot of people and made my plan go smoothly. I want to know about Park Street, Batman said. Don't worry, we'll be there soon. Falcone turned his chair, turned to look at Batman and said, You kind of look like your father. He nodded and said, Very similar. Before Batman could say anything, Falcone said, I swept the major forces at the dock at that time, but I didn't take over the dock, but threw them to the Edward family, and this matter is related to your parents, related. Your mother is a good person and a kind wife. She sympathizes with the laborers on the dock and thinks that they work more than 10 hours a day. Your father agrees. They think they should be better for those poor people. So, they didn't allow the gangsters to oppress those workers, and they made a more relaxed work system for them. You know, after only a few hours of work, you have to take a break, eat something and drink some water. The Wayne family is determined to reform the order of the entire Gotham Pier, but I know they can't do this, but I don't want to fight the Wayne family, so I retreat and let them do whatever they want. I let the Edward family control all the docks. Brother Edward is quite smart. Falcone lit a cigar, and the faint flame shone on his face, and a dark shadow was cast under the sharp eyebrows, covering his eyes. Godfather appearance. So, Edward hired that named Joe to kill my parents. The smoke of the cigar slowly floated up, and Falcone's speech began to become slower and slower, as if the recalled things became more distant and unclear. You mean the one who really did it? No, it's not them, it's not Edward. The person who really did it was a laborer at the dock named Lewis. Labor. Batman felt ridiculous, and asked, why? How could it be a dock worker? I know if you don't understand, the Wayne couple helped them. Yes, the workers didn't have to work so long every day, and were oppressed by gangsters and cargo ship owners. They found their savior. Falcone shook his head and said, but you don't understand, the workers are also divided into 3, 6 and 9 classes. The work of carrying sandbags and carrying heavy objects is the most tiring. The big workers only do the light work of allocating manpower and inventorying materials. Your parents want everyone to not have to work hard. No one does the dirty work. The cargo ship owners have been delayed for too long and lost a lot of goods. They would rather take a long way and do not want to come back to Gotham Pier. You reading www.uakonchu.com. I remember that Lewis was the chief engineer of the 3rd or 4th dock. He was closely watched by the Wayne family and had to be assigned the same work to everyone. He could only work 9 hours a day, with breaks in between. For 2 hours, let them eat. The cargo ship was parked there, no one moved the goods, and the fresh and fruit on it were damaged. The main ship's main owner, Lewis, paid for it. Lewis couldn't afford it. He was beaten by the cargo ship's owner and sailors and broke his leg. Quote. So, he hired that gangster and killed the Wayne couple. Batman's voice was hoarse. He turned to old Edward for help, and together they made that murder on Park Street. You must think it's absurd that Judas betrayed his lord and made his benefactor suffer, Falcone said. Quote. But this is Gotham, a place where the devil will detour when he sees it. Batman closed his eyes. The truth was completely different from what he imagined. This is not a story of perpetrators and innocents entangled in confrontation. There is no justice that can be done at a glance. Everything is not white walls and black shadows, but an old faded gray videotape with the thick dust of that era. The Punks and Edward brothers are dead, but Lewis is still alive. If you still want revenge, go to No. 7 End Lane, Shannon Street, east of the church, where he lives. After speaking, Falcone exhaled the last breath of smoke, and he also closed his eyes. His fingers are well maintained, there are almost no wrinkles, the cigar between his fingers has been burned out, and the fire is gradually extinguished, just like to that boiling era, to all the waves of that turbulent era, silently, painted on a period. In a dark alley, the weak reflections of the armor's activity were entangled with a denser fog. In an instant, the gray fog condensed into a figure and stopped at the end of the alley. The sound of the armor rubbing stopped. The sound of heavy footsteps stepped on the puddles on the ground that were not dry, making a light sound like a talisman. Death knell, that is indeed your death knell. As soon as the voice fell, the sword light flashed, and Schiller disappeared in place in an instant, and reappeared behind the figure. Who is your employer? You don't need to know that. It seems that you are very confident in your business level. Schiller dodged 2 darts again, and then faced the death knell. He said, you shouldn't kill me. I can kill anyone, as long as someone pays the price. Schiller stretched out his hand, and a cluster of flames ignited in his hand. No matter who your employer is, the price he pays you is wrong. Deathstroke was silent for less than a second, then turned and left. Indeed, goodbye. How would you deal with an employer who cheated on you? It depends on the situation. Kill him, I'll pay. You don't have that much money. The richest man in the world settles the bill. Goodbye. Schiller looked at the figure in armor, and disappeared at the end of Gotham Street in a few breaths. He thought that his enemy was indeed capable and could hire Death Knell to kill him. Several consecutive flashes cost Schiller a lot of physical strength. In such a deep alley, no car could come in, so he planned to walk back slowly, and when he got back to the church, he would call a car to pick him up. He turned out of an alley and came to the street. Then he turned around and found that there seemed to be some movement in the deepest part of the street. At this time, Batman was standing in a very shabby, dark and narrow room. The environment here is very bad. Batman has never been in such an uncomfortable room in his life. This is a 3rd floor, the windows are nailed down, all the outer layers of the walls are peeled off, the room is extremely damp, the floor is smooth stone brick, all the furniture is not where it should be, and the rest the place is full of rubbish. The owner of the house saw Batman, the uninvited guest. He was stunned for a moment, then lowered his head, looked at his feet, muttered something vague, turned around, and picked up a jar of salt. Want to hand it to Batman. Batman took the salt shaker, which was empty and nothing, and then the man waved as if to let him go. It was a shriveled and stooped old man with very dark skin and deep sunken eyes. He walked with a limp and kept mumbling some curse words in his mouth. It seems that the neighbor downstairs heard the movement, stuck his head out from under the stairs and said, "Why are you looking for this old guy? Who are you from him? What's up with him? What else can you do? Can't you see it? He has Alzheimer's, and now he doesn't know anyone at all. Even if you know him, he doesn't know you." The neighbor couldn't see Batman's appearance, only a vague figure. He said, "This old guy can't pay the rent. Every time the landlord comes, he gives the salt shaker to others." In those days, the salt shaker was quite valuable, but there was nothing in that salt shaker. But he is lucky. His landlord seems to have died in the hands of a gangster. This attic is not worth much money. If he is killed, he has to collect his body, so he has survived until now. No matter who you are, leave him alone. He can only pick up a little garbage thrown upstairs to eat every day, but his upstairs moved away a few days ago, so he probably won't live long." After speaking, there was a bang from downstairs, and it was the neighbor who closed the door. Batman held the salt shaker. He watched the hunched old man sit on the chair, and stared at the table without saying a word, a little saliva dripping from the corner of his mouth. He saw Louis's hands, which were very rough hands. Almost all the knuckles were twisted from moving heavy objects all the year round. The blood vessels on the dry palms were clearly protruding. "Are you Louis?" There was no answer except for Batman's own voice. "Do you remember Thomas Wayne? Do you remember Martha?" Batman felt his voice tremble. A kind of extreme anger rose from Batman's chest, and he squeezed the salt shaker. His enemies don't remember all the innocents he has hurt, so he forgets all his crimes. This is not a punishment for him, it just allows him to escape his inner censure, Batman thought. He asked Louis over and over again, "Why don't you remember anything? You really don't remember the surname Wayne? What about Edward? What about Falcone?" Just when Batman said Falcone's surname, the aging Louis suddenly let out a strange scream. He fell from the chair trembling all over, yelling non-stop, and threw it at Batman with all the things he could pick up. Tears, snot and saliva flowed down his face together. Batman saw endless fear on his face. Batman thought, Falcone didn't lie to him. When he killed Leaf, he really scared a lot of people. This includes Louis. Schiller walked to the middle of the end alley. He looked up and saw that only a room on the third floor was lit, and there was a dark shadow with pointy ears in the room. He stood downstairs and waited for a while, and saw Batman come out, and Batman was a little surprised when he saw Schiller, but his mind was a little dull now. Schiller looked at Batman and found that he was uninjured and showed no signs of fighting with others. Then his eyes fell on the salt shaker in Batman's hand. Schiller didn't know what it was, but obviously Batman, who was in a complicated mood, really needed to talk, so before Schiller could ask, Batman told the whole story. They were chatting and walking. When they passed by the door of the church, it was almost dawn. Batman held the salt shaker and said, "He doesn't remember all this." When Batman said this sentence, www.mtlnovel.com was no longer angry, a complex emotion was contained in his tone. "You said, he still remembers someone." "Yeah, he still remembers Falcone. Why doesn't he remember Wayne, but Falcone?" Schiller sighed, looked into the distance, and said, "Because of fear, because fear is the deepest scar in the human soul, and it is also the most difficult to remove." "He forgot everything but fear, didn't he?" Batman said. At this time, it was the darkest moment before dawn, the rich black almost swallowed everything, all the buildings were shrouded in shadows, and the outlines could not be seen clearly. Soon, what woke Batman from his thoughts was the heavy bells of Gotham Cathedral. The dull bells traveled far, and the sound waves were as pervasive as darkness, even in the darkest and darkest alleys. Feel that tremor. Batman thought, fear, fear. If he can no longer fulfill his true revenge against the events of that era and the people of that era, if the murderer he tried his best to catch, the object he wants to take revenge on, has completely forgotten all of this, let him full of anger and hatred all in vain. Then he at least reminded Batman of one thing, that is, sometimes, more terrible than death, is the lingering fear. In this case, Batman thought, he will become a dark knight who brings endless fear to all criminals in Gotham. Years ago, with the death of his parents, it was the bat that crossed the sky with heavy shadows. Years later, he will eventually bring the fear of bats to all the criminals in this city. This permeates every street, every dark corner, Gotham Night Clock. Later, you can send this report to Mrs. Felton in the Academic Affairs office. Of course, things related to the club will be organized after the final exam. I don't think the students have so much free time to pay attention to these things now." Quote. Evans nodded with the document in his hand and said, "Indeed, almost everyone studied very hard. Even the few who had a record of skipping classes have been going to the library a lot recently." Schiller flipped through his desk, then handed him a stack of papers and said, "Although I told you that the whole book is the key point, I think with your current level, it may be a fool's errand to memorize the whole book. This is the scope of information for the thesis proposition, let them take the time to read it." Just as he was talking, Bruce knocked on the door, and Evans said, then I won't bother you, Professor, I'll make arrangements as soon as possible. After Bruce came in, he naturally found a chair and sat down. Schiller asked him, "Are you finished studying?" Of course, that's not a lot. Bruce was still quite proud of his IQ and memory. You'd better make sure your thesis can pass, or I'll give it to your housekeeper. What's his name? Ah, Alfred, Professor, my housekeeper's name is Alfred. Oh, yes, if you don't pass the exam this time, I'll call your housekeeper Alfred. Bruce was silent for a while and said, "Okay, you'd better give me some more information." He had a subtle feeling that Schiller's calling parents attitude made him feel that he was being treated as a child. He felt a little resentful, but when he imagined this scene, Bruce felt that let's go back and read the book again. What are you going to do on vacation? I have a lot to do, you know. What are you going to do? Yesterday, the attending physician of Arkham Psychiatric Hospital called me. We are old classmates. He was a little too busy over there. He invited me to help. I plan to bring 2 students to practice. Oh, then who are you going to bring? I've already said hello to Falcone. Evans is definitely going. His grades are quite good. Now he is the first in the class. As for the other, I haven't made up my mind yet. When Bruce was about to speak, Schiller said, "But it's definitely not you anyway. Your grades are too bad." Bruce curled his lips and said, "The things at the Eastern Wharf haven't calmed down recently. Without the Edward family, there's a bit of chaos there. I've been busy lately at night, and so is Gordon. I think it's not just your heroic career that you're busy with at night." "How about the heart-stealing female thief?" Bruce said, "Of course I've only been busy with my other half of my career recently. Serena's good friend Maggie has been in bad health recently, and she hasn't come out for activities. But," Bruce smiled and said, "our justice lawyer, Mr. Harvey, seems to be moving a bit." Schiller raised his eyebrows and said, "Would he like Gotham girls? This is really strange. Who is so attractive?" "Christine, it's Christine, the head of the cheerleading troupe. But isn't she a fan of Batman?" The old principal was charged again and was jailed because Harvey helped Christine testify against him again, and this time, because of Harvey's defense, the old principal had no excuses for medical parole, and he was sentenced to after 137 years. "I'm afraid it will never come out again. You know, how can you not gain the gratitude and admiration of a girl when you speak eloquently and show your pride in court?" Schiller touched the corners of his brows and said, "Tisk tisk, our lawyer is really a blessing." After Bruce left, Schiller also returned to the apartment building where he lived, and he was still chatting with Green Lantern in his mind. He is too experienced with this situation, because the current Green Lantern is in exactly the same state as the little spider who just got superpowers. Obviously, he has already obtained the green light ring from the alien. Compared with Peter, Hal is more mature. After all, he is older and has a pilot's license. His mental quality is much better than that of a high school student. So even though he was chatting with netizens excitedly, he didn't reveal anything about aliens and magic rings. Schiller chatted with him for a while, then clicked on his avatar and found that Green Lantern's abilities could indeed be replicated. Schiller clicked to copy, but he didn't expect it to be delayed for a long time this time, and the system's prompt sound didn't come. After a while, he suddenly found that the symbiote in his brain was sending out a slight buzzing. He called the symbiote a few times, but there was no response. After a while, the system sounded, "The world in the ring has been loaded." When Schiller was at a loss, a series of excited brain waves suddenly came from the symbiote, and then Schiller felt something on his finger. He looked down, and it was a silver-gray quaint ring. Schiller felt very strange. The system's ability to copy should not be able to copy the external things, and even if the Green Lantern's green ring is copied, it should be green. Why does it turn gray? Then, the symbiote gave Schiller the answer. Green Lantern is a very special hero. Most of his abilities come from the Green Lantern ring, including the shaping of green energy body and blade, the force field of Green Lantern energy, the ability to teleport and the ability to heal, etc. These are all brought to him by the Green Lantern ring, special abilities. Therefore, the Green Lantern's ability copied by the system must also have a carrier. Schiller didn't have a green light ring, so the system turned the symbiote gray fog into a carrier of this ability. So the carrier is you, so what's the use of this ring? It's useless, but it looks good, said the symbiote. Okay, Schiller said. He glanced at his finger. The ring was actually very simple. It was a silver gray ring with a pattern of wavy lines on it. It didn't look out of place. The only thing that was a little strange was that it was worn on the ring finger. So how to use this ability? Schiller asked the symbiote. Think about it in your head. Schiller closed his eyes and concentrated. Soon, he found that there was a gray fog in the dark field of vision. The fog gradually enlarged. After a moment of white light, his consciousness appeared on an island shrouded in gray fog. This island is not big, and you can see the end as far as you can see. Schiller controlled his vision and flew to the edge of the island, then looked down. Beneath the island is a huge city without boundaries. The island and the city were still shrouded in layers of hazy gray mist. The city was unbelievably large, and all the buildings in the haze took on strange shapes, gigantic creatures that shuttled through the city. This is an isolated island floating above a huge city. Schiller began to recall Green Lantern's ring world. In the comics, Green Lantern's ring has a separate world inside. Green Lantern shrinks his enemies and locks them in this world, and he himself is trapped in Green Lantern in the emerald dunes of the ring world. Even the Green Lantern ring himself seems unable to fully control their ring world. Just like Schiller now, his consciousness can only stay within the confines of this isolated island, and the one below can't see any details. Huge city, completely out of his control. But fortunately, this isolated island doesn't seem to have any connection with the city below, and those huge shadows that suddenly appeared in the fog did not notice that there was something over their heads. And Schiller was surprised to find that he seemed to have entered this world in flesh, and here, he could also communicate with the symbiote. He cut off his consciousness, returned to reality, looked down at his watch. Time was flowing. In other words, it is equivalent to an independent refuge. In theory, if he encounters an irresistible danger, he can directly enter the world of gray fog and wait for the crisis to pass. Schiller thought, the huge city under the isolated island and the huge figures looming in the gray fog must be hiding huge secrets, and they are also very dangerous. It is not a good idea to stay there for too long. Unless there is a life-threatening danger, it is better to stay in this strange and bizarre ring world. www.mtlnovel.com. Later, Mrs. Felton from the Academic Affairs office came over. She had come to check with Schiller about the cost of textbooks for the next semester, but she was a very enthusiastic wife, and she said to Schiller, "Our new principal was just yesterday. He's out of the hospital, maybe he'll be back in the office tomorrow." She quietly reminded Schiller. "He looks a little anxious, maybe he wants to go to war." As Mrs. Felton said, Schiller received a call from the headmaster Selden that night. This time Selden seems to have learned to be smart. He did not aggressively ask Schiller to complete some tasks as he did at the beginning, but said a bunch of empty words to make him work well, and finally told Schiller that recently Gotham University some of his professorships may be changed, and he invited some old friends who had met at Princeton to introduce experts and professors to him to form the new faculty of Gotham University. He seems to want to use this method to make Schiller nervous. After all, in the university, the resources in the hands of professors depend on the school's emphasis on their teaching subjects. Now Schiller is indeed a golden sign of Gotham University. The resume is really strong, and some students from other places even apply for Gotham University specifically for this professor. But if more world-class experts and scholars join the university, and organize their own laboratories in the school to lead students to study world-class topics, will the school's resources still be so skewed towards the subject of psychology? But it's hard to say. Schiller originally had no opinion on this matter. After all, he also hoped that Gotham University would be a little better and add luster to his teaching resume. Until he saw the name of Victor Frith in the list of newly hired professors by Principal Selden. The new principal, Selden, is actually quite capable and experienced, and has a wide network of contacts. The only problem is that his luck is really bad. No, perhaps it should be said that it is very bad. His friends helped him nominate a total of 6 professors, and one of them just happened to meet one of the villains of Gotham in the future, Victor Freeze. And after Selden checked their files, he planned to hire 3 of them, including Victor Frith, the Freezer. After the invitation letter was sent, there was only one professor who accepted the offer of Gotham University, and it happened to be Victor Frith, the Freezer. Gotham University is really in trouble. It has just captured a few demons, and captured a few more demons. Jonathan the Scarecrow has just left, and Victor, the Frozen Man, has just left. And Victor seemed to need this errand very much. Before Schiller could communicate with Bruce to stop Selden's hiring, the invitation letter had just been sent out at noon the day before, and Victor had already arrived at Gotham University the next afternoon. It's as fast as if he's going to run out of food if he doesn't do the job. Fortunately, just like the Scarecrow, the current Victor is just an ordinary scholar and professor. In fact, Schiller knew that even the later Frozen Man was considered the milder of Gotham villains. He usually likes to freeze Batman, and then chat with him about philosophy and art. Most of his paranoia and madness or it comes from love for his wife, not necessarily against Batman or Gotham. The Victor Schiller saw was very similar to himself. Both of them were very typical scholars. Victor was tall and straight, wearing a pair of glasses, and the collar and cuffs of his suit were meticulously taken care of, although his expression a little haggard, but still looks like a full-fledged professor. Each professor has his own independent office, but there are also public offices where everyone sits together for activities and chats. After Jonathan left, his public office space was vacant. This time Victor came, and he happened to be sitting there. The original Jonathan's position was next to Schiller. During the first chat with Victor, Schiller found that Victor's eyes had been staring at the ring on Schiller's ring finger. After a while, he finally brought the topic to the family, and then asked, "You seem to be married. Is your wife also in Gotham now?" In European and American countries, it is not polite to talk about each other's marital status at the first meeting. Some people may feel that this offends their privacy. It can be seen that Victor's mental state is not very good now. He seems to be very anxious and wants to seek approval. When Schiller heard this question, he was stunned for a moment. He didn't know how to answer. He couldn't tell the other party that he had a symbiote that he watched a lot of TV series, right? Schiller's silence was understood by Victor as another meaning. Humans are like this. When they feel insecure and anxious, they unconsciously seek out their peers and seek comfort from their own experiences. Victor thought of Schiller's amazing resume, and he thought that perhaps among those thrilling detective stories, there might be a more poignant love story than him. With this sense of identity of the same people who fall from the end of the world, Victor and Schiller quickly became acquainted with each other. In the subsequent exchanges, Schiller found that he and Victor do have a lot in common. Victor likes to talk about ancient philosophy, modern art and religious art. Schiller also likes theology and philosophy. The two have a lot in common, and they can even chat for an entire afternoon when there is no class. Schiller didn't expect that the first close friend he found after crossing over was the villain Frozen. But I have to say that this Mr. Freeze, who has not yet become a villain, is actually very charming. He is always gentle, with strong empathy, gentle and methodical words, and has very unique opinions when talking about some issues. Chatting with him reminded Schiller of his previous life and the debate with experts in the same field, which can always collide with countless sparks of thinking. This moderate villain has a pretty good look and feel, which is also recognized by everyone in the entire office. With the in-depth communication with Victor, Schiller also knew his current situation. Victor has mothballed his wife using cryogenic technology, but it costs a lot of money and requires a demanding site. The institute that originally funded his research was unwilling to provide a venue for Victor because of insufficient funds, so Victor came to Gotham University in a hurry, except because the salary given here is not bad, it is for the Ween family. He paid for a cryogenic laboratory here, where he could ensure that his wife was kept in a frozen state and her condition would not worsen. If combined with the later stories of Freezing Man, it may make his behavior seem a little perverted, but in fact, most of the colleagues in the office can understand Victor. The theory that people who cure diseases are frozen and waited until the day when medical technology develops. And Victor is just one of the forerunners. Schiller believes that such a Victor Frith, even if he did not suffer from an accidental experiment and became the later Frozen Man, is a fairly reliable ally. Compared with the little bat that has not yet grown up, the Frozen Man with the world's cutting-edge low-temperature technology and full of knowledge seems to be more reliable. If you want to solve the trouble of freezing people forever, you still have to solve the degenerative disease on his wife first. Schiller followed Victor to visit the cryogenic cell where his wife was sealed. Mrs. Frith was not very beautiful, just an ordinary white woman, but Victor always looked at her with love in her eyes. Schiller asked the symbiote in his head, "Is there a way?" The symbiote said, "The nerves are atrophied, which is very troublesome." Victor looked at the cryogenic chamber and said, "My wife's neurodegenerative disease is almost incurable, her nerve cells are dying so fast, I only had time to seal her up, there is no way to reverse it, even if it can be barely controlled live cell death, immune inflammation also damage her brain." Victor squatted down. Anyone could hear the desperation in his tone. Maybe he himself knew that he was just deceiving himself by freezing his wife and waiting for a solution that might never come. Schiller frowned and thought. He thought, although Victor is a villain who deserves to be named Gotham, he is indeed the world's top cryogenic scientist, but professional things have to be done by professional people, for example, a certain more advanced neurosurgeon. The next day, Schiller returned to Marvel's New York. When Strange met Schiller at his home, he threw the coat he just took off on the porch next to him, and said, "Oh my God, you just showed up in my home so struttingly. I haven't settled with you yet. You sold my information to an institution. That's what they asked me, and I can't help it." In the process of staring at Schiller, Strange couldn't do anything. He said, "Okay, but you can't expect me to be like a well-trained agent, doing nothing." Said, "And it was indeed you who threatened me first. Don't mention this, I have a way to make a fortune now, would you like to hear it?" Strange asked suspiciously, "The way to make a fortune? If there is such a way, would you come to me? I heard that you gave that Stark an hourly consultation fee of $1 million, and he actually paid him back." Agreed. When I heard the news, I couldn't wait to go back to university to study psychology. Now, there is a lady who has a very serious neurodegenerative disease, and her husband may have a patented low-temperature technology that is unique in the world. You know, the kind of technology that can be eaten for a lifetime by the patent fee alone. If you can cure this lady's disease, then we can share this patent together. Strange pursed his lips and sighed, "I repeat, I am a doctor, not God. Do you think you can't cure this disease? But first of all, shouldn't you let me see the patient first, not your second-order dealer? For some reason, you may not be able to see her, but I have all her pathological information here." Saying that, Schiller conjured a large pile of paper out of thin air. Strange took it and glanced at it briefly, then shook his head and said, "Impossible, it can't be saved, give it up." As soon as Schiller was about to speak, Strange said, "This is no longer a neuroscience thing. If you want to restore her to full health, it is almost as difficult as taking a piece of bacon that has been roasted and turning it into a pig." Then he looked Schiller up and down, and finally set his eyes on the ring on his ring finger. Strange said, "Well, my words were a bit absolute just now, or you can go and find someone else, although I don't think there is a better neurosurgeon in the world than me." "What if you work with Stark?" Strange just wanted to deny it, but he thought about it and said, "That Stark may have some research in mechanics, but if his technology is to be applied to neurosurgery, it still needs a lot of research and modification. If you can convince him to put so much effort into researching this technology, then I can try it, but you'd better prepare a consultation fee that will satisfy me." Strange's voice has not yet finished. www.mtlnovel.com. Schiller has disappeared, remembering the ring he saw on Schiller's hand just now, and Schiller's attitude. Strange obviously misunderstood something. He sighed and said to himself, "Ha, love, it's stupid enough." Schiller, who suddenly appeared behind Stark, startled him, and then he shouted, "I know you have this kind of magic. But it's not like you can walk 30 stories without elevators. Reason, aren't you afraid of being stuck in the wall?" Schiller said, "What are you talking about? How could teleportation get stuck in the wall? That's too stupid. Hopefully I won't get a call from a maintenance worker one day to tell me there's a human-shaped hole in a wall in the Stark building. Okay, I'm here to find you on business." Schiller took out the pile of documents again. 10 minutes later, Stark said, "Actually, you really found the right person. I still have some research on neurology." He took the pen around the table and said as he walked, "You know, last time I got a lot of biomechanical information from Obadiah's database, and there were some technologies related to the adaptation of the nervous system to mechanical control. Although these technologies are very dangerous, it cannot be denied that, if successful, it will allow the human body to control the mecha with an unprecedented level of sophistication. If the machine can receive commands directly from the nerve center, it will save the time required for all secondary operations, and all the armors will be able to be truly arm-like. So you can do it? No, not yet. Obadiah's research on this technology is also stuck in a bottleneck period. There is a key technical threshold that needs to be broken through. Now we have no ideas. The weather in New York is much better than Gotham. Although it is already winter, the weather is still sunny. From the window on the third floor of the clinic, you can clearly see the busy traffic on the highway on the other side of the skyline. Schiller got up early, and Pikachu slammed the door open with his little short hand, then stretched out and said, "Your old-fashioned kettle is screaming too loudly." "Jan, where did you get it? Such an antique." Schiller walked down the stairs, Pikachu slid down from the handrail, and reached the restaurant on the second floor. Schiller used magic to float the kettle and put it on the table, then he waved again, a pan flew over, he poured some olive oil on it, and started to make breakfast. Pikachu opened the refrigerator door with a bang, got in and rummaged through the things to eat, and said with disgust, "I should have thrown your blue cheese, how can it be so stinky? Oh, and these lettuce, this thing tastes like chewing on plastic, let me see, here. My cheddar cheese, help me in a breakfast sandwich later, and this can of my favorite luncheon meat, help me cut it and sandwich it in the middle, remember, it must be thicker." At this time, the door downstairs of the clinic slammed, and Schiller heard Peter's voice along with the footsteps going upstairs. "Sir. I'm here. I asked my uncle to borrow a toolbox, I'll be able to take that thing today. The switch is fixed." As soon as he came up, the open door of the refrigerator just blocked his view, he slammed the refrigerator door closed, and then with a bang, a scream came. "Oh. Shit, my waist." Peter hurriedly opened the refrigerator door again, he found the furry Pikachu clinging to the refrigerator divider, and his waist just hit the lid of the can on the refrigerator door. Peter took him down and said, "You still have a waist. Where are you? Hey, boy, don't force me to expose you. It wasn't because the electric switch was broken yesterday. It's because you died 30 lives and still haven't cleared the customs." Peter covered Pikachu's mouth and said, "Dr. Schiller, what have you done? Why is it so delicious? Ordinary fried sandwiches, if you want to eat them, I'll make you a large one." "Okay, but it doesn't need to be too big. My appetite has become smaller recently." "That's really good news," Schiller said while frying an egg. "At least your aunt doesn't have to cook for you every day to make your wrist hurt." While chatting with Schiller, Peter glanced at the ring on his ring finger. The subtle change in his expression was seen by Pikachu, who looked left and right, and said, "We haven't unplugged the game cartridge from yesterday. Do you want another plate?" Peter didn't know why, but with a flick of Pikachu's tail, the fluffy lightning-shaped tail pointed to the downstairs, Peter understood, and he immediately followed Pikachu downstairs. After a while, the two came back murmuring, and Pikachu jumped on the stove and looked at Schiller. Schiller was using a spatula to turn the golden omelet in the center. Peter winked at Pikachu behind him, and Pikachu wrinkled his nose and said, well, I think. You're still working hard to cook for us. Shall we go out to eat?" Schiller gave him a very surprised look, and said, "The sun has risen from the west today. Usually you just let me fry the eggs a little more tender. I mean, well, nothing, but I always feel that you humans shouldn't keep everything in your heart, it's not good for your health. I'm a psychiatrist, I know this better than you, or whose money would I make?" Schiller said. Pikachu flicked his tail, and just as he was about to say something, Peter grabbed him and then Peter laughed dryly and said, "Ha ha, doctor, let's play games for a while, and come back to help you later." Pikachu slapped Peter's face with his tail, in revenge for hitting his waist just now. Peter, not to be outdone, grabbed Pikachu's ears and threw it around. The two went downstairs while fighting. Schiller felt a little puzzled. He always felt that Peter was hiding something from him. After a while, Steve, who had just finished running in the morning, also came in. He wiped his sweat with a towel, and then walked up to the second floor along the scent. He said, "The structure of this old house is too unreasonable. It's still on the second floor. Thank you for having the money to buy a good range hood," Schiller said. "Then you have to thank Nick too. He gave you a lot of bonuses, right?" "What? In what name did he give you the bonus? How much did you get? 30% or 20%? Not counting taxes, it's only 18%. Steve shrugged. His economic understanding of the distribution of extra income is really getting more and more macro. Steve put the towel on the rail, then opened the refrigerator very naturally and said, "Let me see, what about the steak I put here last time?" "Oh, it's here, there's a half left, I think I can make a beef cheeseburger, what about the cheese?" "I remember last time there was half left." "Don't look, you forgot that I have a rat like Jerry here. What kind of cheese can survive the next day except blue cheese?" My God, that was almost 2 pounds of cheese, and he ate it all. Nothing left. That's not it, it's not just him. Peter made a margarita pizza last time and put at least a pound on it. Steve shook his head and closed the refrigerator door and said, "Young people these days really don't know how to save. Is there any good convenience store in Hell's Kitchen? I can just go buy some cheese slices. Go out and turn right and walk 2 streets ahead to Mrs. Helena's. Of course, you'd better say you're here to buy cheese, or she might think you're applying for a job." Applying for a job. In this place, what else needs to be applied for? Of course there is. Mrs. Helena has 3 strip clubs and their business is booming. She should like yours the most. Steve curled his lips and said, "I'd better take a detour and leave Hell's Kitchen before buying." Then he came over and patted Schiller on the shoulder and said, "Hey, I know you are a doctor, but doctors are ordinary people, and psychiatrists are not omnipotent. If you have something to talk about, you can come to me, we are friends." After he finished speaking, he turned around and left, making Schiller very inexplicable. He just got up in the morning to make breakfast and fry an egg. Why is everyone's attitude weird? Not long after Steve left, Stark flew in through the window wearing a battle armor and carrying a lot of documents. Schiller turned his head and was taken aback by Stark's dark circles. He said, "What did you do?" "Oh, shouldn't it? Did Miss Pepper ask for leave today?" "What are you talking about? I've been doing research all night for the information you brought yesterday." After he finished speaking, he put the pile of documents on Schiller's desk and said, "There has been little progress in neural external technology, and Uncle Obadiah is still in a coma, so I can't ask him, but I figured out another way." Iron Man was still wearing a battle armor, and he pointed directly to one of the parts of the document with the metal-covered fingernails and said, "If the aging nerves and dead nerve cells cannot be restored, then we will find a way to replace it with machinery. It's like replacing a heart. I don't think you need to explain the principle to me clearly, I just want to know, how feasible is it?" Stark held his arms and stared at the data maps. He said, "You have to know that even if I am a genius, it is impossible to conjure technology out of thin air. More importantly, even if I master this technology, it must go through a lot of safety testing before it can be put into use." Stark also glanced at the ring on Schiller's finger. He touched his lips, and said, "If you are really urgent, I can call a neuroscience consultation in the name of the Stark Group, that can get the most famous neuroscience research experts in the world. Of course, you'd better invite patients, otherwise they won't be able to figure out a way out of thin air." "I'm afraid it will be difficult," Schiller said. What he said is the truth, not to mention how he can get DC characters to Marvel. Even if he can get them over, the time flow of the 2 parties is inconsistent, which may cause many problems and may also cause great risks. Schiller is very clear that, unlike in Marvel, he has one of the most important tasks in the 600th world, and that is to get rid of the entanglement of his enemies. His enemy is by no means an ordinary person. First of all, he can hire Death Knell to kill him. The words left before Death Knell have revealed enough information that when Schiller wants to pay him to kill him at the time of the employer, Death Knell's first reaction was, "You can't afford this price." You reading www.uakanshu.com. When Schiller further probed that the richest man in the world would pay for it, Death Knell still left without hesitation, which shows that he judged that even if there is enough price, it is not worth his complete defection. Being able to make the world's top mercenary Death Knell make such a judgment is already very telling. It seems that the original owner was not involved in a simple entanglement of interests. There must be a bigger conspiracy behind it. To this end, Schiller hopes that Victor can become his ally to make up for his deficiencies in engineering and mechanics, so he is willing to help Victor's wife as much as possible to prevent Victor from becoming frozen. It is possible for people, but this does not mean that he must take a huge risk to take people to shuttle between the 2 worlds. Moreover, this does not fundamentally solve the problem. The experts and scholars of DC cannot cure this disease, so the ordinary experts of Marvel may not be able to either. Schiller kept silent while thinking, and finally Stark couldn't help it. He said, is she okay? Right. Schiller said, what? Stark touched his forehead with some embarrassment, and then said, I heard from Coulson that your wife's condition is not very good. Schiller was stunned. Where did this rumor come from? Where did he get a wife? He said why everyone's attitude is so strange today. Soon, he remembered that the first person he went to see after returning to Marvel, the future Doctor Strange, the current neurologist Strange. He is such a clever little devil. Schiller said viciously to the symbiote in his head, next time, you must remember to eat Strange's brain. It's useless for him to keep it anyway. I think you may have misunderstood. Natasha's voice came from the other end of the phone. No, you don't need to explain. Besides, S.H.I.E.L.D. actually has medical insurance for family members. As I said, our welfare benefits are quite good. Wait, you mean the money? 30% of the amount Nick reported. So high. Captain America's bonus is only 18%. Oh, yes, thank you for your comfort, she's okay. Natasha said on the phone. I heard Stark wanted to hire some neuroscientists for his mech, to do further modifications, and I would like you to remind him, even though Colonel Rhodes resigned his mech. The military will never give up the position, even if there is no Air Force, there are still the Army and Navy, this trouble is far from over. Schiller said. I see, I believe that Stark should be able to handle these things by himself. In fact, Schiller is right, Stark really needs to deal with these things alone, and what's more troublesome is that he has to learn to take care of himself now. Before, most of Stark's weapon manufacturing departments and military industry departments were managed by Obadiah, but now, Obadiah is still in a coma because of serious injuries, too old, and poor resilience. Before she woke up, Pepper was going crazy, and she wished she could split it into 8 people by herself. Originally, Pepper was only Stark's private secretary. Even if he helped him manage the company, he was only in charge of some personnel and procurement matters. As a result, now that Obadiah is lying down, Pepper began to take over the entire Stark industry in an all-round way. She no longer has much time to worry about Stark's life. As we all know, Stark's self-care ability in life is basically zero. Originally, he and a good friend of Rhodes could go to sleepover, but now Rhodes is also on vacation. No matter how smart Jarvis is, he is just an electronic life can't take care of Stark in every way. Schiller and Stark stared wide-eyed across the door of the clinic. Stark patted the door and said, let me in. It's still daytime, don't you open the door here. You didn't have an appointment, so of course we didn't open the door. Why can they all come and go at any time, but I can't? You also said that they will leave at any time, so how long are you going to stay here? Don't tell me it's a month. It's not that long. It mainly depends on how long Pepper will be busy. I guess with her wisdom, she can take over the entire Stark Industries group in about 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I suggest you turn left to S.H.I.E.L.D. Hey, you know I don't want to go there, there are 2 of Howard's old comrades in arms. Stark bent and made a quotation mark gesture. Having a tea party every day, recalling their World War II years or something, I can't stand it. As he said, Stark was about to push the door and go in, Schiller put his hand against the door on the other side, and he said, listen, I'm very touched that you stayed up all night studying neurological data for me, but that doesn't mean that so you can stay here for a month. That spider boy can do it, why can't I? Schiller took a deep breath and opened his mouth. Stark outside the door glared at him. He was not wearing a mecha now, and the wind was blowing so hard outside that he had to scramble to hold down his scarf. Well, it looks a little pitiful. Schiller hesitated for a moment, and Stark pushed open the door directly and squeezed in. After entering, he patted the coat on his body, then looked up and down and said, your house is truly the structure and function that I have ever seen. The most mismatched. Schiller regretted it immediately, but he regretted more later. As a friend, Iron Man is indeed very loyal. If he only appears in front of you once a month, you will think that he is the best friend in the world. He is smart, rich and loyal. But when he swayed in front of you every day for a month, you would just think he was a piece of shit. Stark is a typical representative who can only be seen from a distance. Soon, Schiller understood how wise it was for Rode to pack his bags and travel to Antarctica so quickly. He definitely expected the current situation. Just left New York without stopping. The next morning, before Schiller got up, he heard the movement downstairs. Stark opened his mouth to avoid the refrigerator. As soon as he turned around, the cuff of his sweater rubbed against the edge of the dining table. A finger ripped out the sleeve, and quickly ran upstairs to change clothes. When he came down again, his mouth kept babbling, "I think the air here is full of oil, why can't you clean this place well? God, the dust on the handrails here is so thick. It hasn't been cleaned in 10 years, and those picture frames are simply a delivery room for bacteria. Oh, the kettle, and this kettle, did you know that the steam it spews may contain a variety of bacteria that are bad for the respiratory tract? Don't come here, you rat, I'm allergic to hair, while I go, has it been vaccinated? Shouldn't it still have some plague on it?" Stark shuddered to himself. After breakfast, Stark leaned on the sofa in the living room and said into the phone, "Oh, yes, sweetheart, I'm not so free lately, magazine cover. Then you'll have to ask the bald editor, you know, I'm busy over there in Hollywood, Olivia. No, she's not as pretty as you, and of course, I don't think anyone was prettier than you on that show." Schiller, who was sitting by the window writing his thesis, couldn't bear it anymore and hit Stark on the back of the head with a ballpoint pen. Stark let out an "ow," and turned his head to look at Schiller in shock. After a while, Peter came, and the two started playing games together again. When these two people meet, it really fully explains what it means to wake up in the morning without going to sleep at night. When Stark was in the laboratory, the day and night were basically reversed. He usually started experiments at 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, until 8 or 9 in the morning, and then slept until the afternoon, when he was most inspired. Originally, Peter often stayed up all night, but he stayed with Schiller for a period of time because of the renovation of the house. Schiller's schedule was very healthy. Maybe I adjusted my schedule, and now I basically go to bed around 12 o'clock. As a yellow-haired mouse, Pikachu is actually a nocturnal creature, and the most active time is from 3 to 4 in the morning. So, when Stark came, the 3.5 people in this house all lived in different biological clocks. The fierce conflict between work and rest time made the whole house a mess. When Schiller was packing up and preparing to go to bed, Stark just woke up. When Stark and Peter were playing the game, Peter was sleepy, waiting for Stark. When he and Pikachu fought until dawn, and when he was exhausted and ready to go to sleep, Schiller was awake again. Not to mention that there are two superheroes flying around New York with nothing. Iron Man usually saves the world during the day, which means sacrificing his sleeping time during the day, so he will occasionally jump up from 10 to 11 in the morning when Pikachu is sleeping soundly, suddenly jumping up like a corpse to save the world. For this reason Pikachu nearly urinates in Stark's water glass. The good neighbor Spider likes to go out at night, and also sacrifices his sleep time at night, usually in the early morning when Schiller is sound asleep. For this reason, every time Peter goes out or comes back, he is often flying up, ballpoint pen and teacup hit the back of the head. Steve and Stark, who come to visit from time to time, have an irreconcilable contradiction. Every time Steve runs by in the morning, Stark is still awake. He couldn't sleep, and he was going to duel with Steve in his steel suit. When the two disbanded on the spot after the fight, it was almost noon. That's right, Peter, who stayed up until midnight, got up again. Natasha stood at the door of the clinic and asked Schiller, very puzzled, "Excluding your pets, there should be 3 of you here, www.mtlnovel.com, but why can I only see one of them forever? My colleagues in the statistics department have given up the timetable for your activities. Every time I come here to find someone, it's like a lottery draw." Schiller was also very angry. He said, "This is my house, of course their schedules follow me, and my schedule is the healthiest. I go to bed at 8 o'clock in the evening and wake up at 5 in the morning. A more regular schedule." Stark is also very righteous. He said, "There is no great scientist who does not do experiments all night. Night is the best time God has given humans to use their genius brains. Please, the invention I made at night can change this world. Why should I tune in?" Peter also complained, "How can there still be a good baby who goes to bed at 9 o'clock at night? My classmates are like this, and there are too many new games released recently. Why do I stay up late? You have to ask those game manufacturers why put all the fun games on sale this month. Pikachu made more sense. I'm just a mouse. You actually expect a mouse to adjust its schedule like a human. The symbiote was also very aggrieved. He said in Schiller's mind, their brains are always particularly fragrant in the middle of the night, and they smell really delicious. Finally, one night, Schiller slept until the early morning. The symbiote was desperately swallowing in his brain, and as soon as Schiller was woken up, Stark rushed into the door with excitement and shouted, I know this is what's the matter. Come and see. Look here. What do you think of this structure? As a neuron of a nano-neuron. I'm a genius. It must work. The next morning, Pepper was at the door of the psychological clinic and received a confused Stark who was thrown out with his luggage. Human beings, as social animals, always have a tendency to converge, and what kind of environment they are in a group will inevitably be changed by this environment, and now Stark has a deep understanding of this. Peter is sweet with his childhood sweetheart Gwen every day. After Gwen officially established a relationship with Peter some time ago, the two of them started dating 2 or 3 times a week. Spider-Man, who hasn't progressed to the part of meeting his father-in-law, has been bubbling with happiness recently. He can hear him talking excitedly every day, what little gifts he received from his girlfriend, or which restaurant he went to eat. The dishes are especially delicious. Stark had to admit that even if the details Peter said were naive, the restaurant they went to date was a roadside stall that a rich man like Stark would never go to, but every time he heard Peter's description, Stark would never stop. Can fully feel his happiness. In addition to Peter, the story of Schiller and his wife became richer and richer in details and became more and more poignant through the mouth of Scranch, a clever little ghost. Originally, it was only the information that Coulson got during his routine investigation of Strange, but how could he keep this kind of gossip in his heart alone? I heard a very real and detailed version. Strange's short sentences were enriched by the genius agent Coulson into a story, and when this story reached the ears of Natasha and Nick, Natasha was a woman, and she was very interested in this kind of romantic love. The story has a lot of interest, and the emotional brain that belongs to a woman allows her to add more romantic details of her own brain to this story, making it more real. And Nick, who's a skeptic, knows this fact, and he's bound to investigate. In this investigation, he really found some clues. He found out that the medical fees paid by Shield and Stark to Schiller originally only stayed in an American account of Schiller, but just recently, the large sum of money was transferred by him to an international company in Switzerland. In the account, Nick could not check the whereabouts of the money afterward. He guessed that the money might have been used by Schiller to keep his wife alive. Some time ago, Schiller told everyone that he would be away for a while. In fact, at that time, Nick wanted to track his whereabouts, but the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. On his trail, Nick thinks that Schiller may have used his magical powers to go to his wife. Nick has always believed that in order to be a good agent, in addition to careful logical thinking ability, you must also have the ability to associate and diverge. In many cases, inadvertent inspiration may bring unexpected changes to actions. Therefore, when these various factors are added together, Nick is sure that this matter is closely related. He believes that Schiller's wife may not be American, because he could not find such a disappeared woman in the file. Schiller may have met her during a study tour. After they fell in love and got married, this lady may suffering from a disease that is temporarily incurable, but will continue to deteriorate, combined with the low-temperature technology mentioned by Schiller in Strange before. Nick speculates that Schiller is likely to have mastered a kind of permafrost technology to seal his wife, prevent the disease from getting worse, and has been looking for a means of treatment. What Nick sees from this story is not just poignant love. He has always wanted to win Schiller completely to S.H.I.E.L.D., to work for them, if S.H.I.E.L.D. can do something about the treatment of his wife. Achievement. Nick believes that soon, S.H.I.E.L.D. will have another powerful arm. Therefore, Nick also came to the information of various neuroscientists, intending to see who is qualified to solve this problem. If Schiller heard Nick's heart and knew the story of his brain, he must applaud the king of secret agents. Isn't this the love story of Victor the Freeze and his wife? The story of Frozen Man is very good, and it will be mine in the next second. Later, when this story reached Stark's ears, he naturally thought that Nick must have solid evidence, so he also believed that Schiller was indeed trying to find a cure because of his wife. This fact has been quite shocking to Stark. After all, in the years he has grown up, most of the people he has met are bad people who are almost as good as his father. And the more fatal blow came from Captain America Steve. A few days ago, Stark found that Steve didn't run in the morning, so he asked Schiller what was wrong. Schiller said that Steve was in a bad mood recently. Stark was so happy. Captain America was in a bad mood, but Iron Man was in a good mood. When Steve came back, Stark wanted to laugh at him fiercely, but Steve looked very haggard at the time. Schiller also looked serious and sad, and Peter basically didn't dare to show his anger. In these days without Pepper, Stark was wandering around, and he could finally read a little bit of air. Seeing everyone was like this, he also held back his words. Afterwards, he went to Schiller to ask what happened to Steve, but Schiller just shook his head and let him ask Steve himself. How could Iron Man take the initiative to ask Captain America? However, Stark's excessive curiosity eventually led him to find Steve. Then he learned from Steve's mouth that his and Peggy's romantic love story spanned a century. The weak and helpless recruit who just entered the military camp meets a heroic and caring female officer. After the recruit became the famous Captain America, they were born and died together, and they were each other's most perfect soulmates. Even after a century, Captain America is still determined, only Peggy is his perfect dance partner. But the ending of this romantic story is deplorable. A few days ago, Steve saw Peggy lying on the hospital bed, who was aging, and learned from the doctor that she might die soon. He saw that the photo of him that Peggy kept was not the strong Captain America after being injected with the serum, but the timid and bullied Steve who had just entered the boot camp. After being transformed into Captain America, it's been a long time since Steve cried so hard that he almost passed out. He was really about to collapse. He even rushed to Nick's office irrationally and asked him if there was any special serum that could keep Peggy alive. But unfortunately, in the end, Steve could only accept this ending with great pain and helplessness. This story shocked Stark even more, because in Steve's mouth, his father Howard was a participant in the whole story, and he and Peggy were once friends. This can't help but make Stark start to think, is he a little too alternative? When it comes to women, Stark is of course not lacking. Magazine young models, party girls or Hollywood female stars, Stark changes one a day, sometimes even several a day. But when it comes to falling in love, when it comes to true love, Stark thinks back and finds that his head is empty. From childhood to adulthood, he has not had any love experience that he can handle and resonate with his friends as well. First love, it seems to be a bit of an impression. Stark thought hard, but still had to admit that he almost forgot. Peter and Gwen are on the same page, Schiller and his wife are separated, and Captain America and Peggy are still alive. And Stark, surrounded by this group of people, couldn't help but start thinking hard with his genius brain, why is he different? Pepper looks a little weird at me recently. In the S.H.I.E.L.D. cafeteria, Stark, Schiller and Peter sat at a table to eat. After Schiller threw Stark out, Pepper could only foster him. Stark was very reluctant to go to S.H.I.E.L.D., but if he didn't go, he would have to sleep on the street. Strange. In what way? I'm not joking, I mean it seriously. I can't tell her look in her eyes. She's a little worried, a little relieved, but also a little sympathetic. My profession should really be handed over to you. Can you see so much in your eyes? Stark waved his hand perfunctorily and said, please, I've met women who are not 1,000 or 800. What they are thinking can be seen from their eyes. Tell me, what happened to Pepper? It depends on what's happened to you recently. What's the matter with you recently? What's wrong with me? I'm very good. Schiller put down his fork, snapped his fingers, and said, Jarvis, can you analyze the difference in your master's behavior recently? Jarvis beeped twice, and Stark also held his face with his hands, waiting for his smart butler to answer. According to analysis, you have rejected 18 invitations of the opposite within a week. This is the only place that is different from the usual behavior pattern. In an instant, Stark saw an almost identical expression to Pepper's on Schiller's face. I'm not. You don't need to explain, If you figure it out, then congratulations to you, if you are powerless. Schiller shrugged and said, then it can only be said that it deserves it. Schiller knows that in the comics, this guy is a super stallion, not to mention his first love Meredith, who was beaten by a bat and Bane, Gamora, Captain Marvel, Wasp, Spider-Woman, She-Hulk, You reading www.uakonchu.com all sleep after flirting, and run after sleeping. I'm not. Stark put down the cutlery in his hand, put his hands on the table and said, I just don't think they are any good. Then who was talking about the beauty of a yacht? Okay, Stark said like a deflated ball. I have never talked about a decent relationship. You were always in my ears, talking about love, those romantic stories. I thought they were everything. Charming, short-lived and passionate. What's wrong with them? But Peter actually said yesterday that his girlfriend would like to hear him talk about how he made those machines, and the two of them talked about it all afternoon. Actually, we haven't talked enough yet. The next day we went to the exhibition hall again, the one from Stark Industries. The machines there are so cool that we didn't feel tired after walking around all day. With Stark's murderous look in his eyes, Peter silently filled his mouth with a sandwich. Quote. Well, no one has ever wanted to hear me talk about this. What they would rather listen to is all kinds of Hollywood intelligence, gossip about famous brand shows, new clothes for winter and spring. How could anyone be willing to listen to me on how to make mechas? But you really want to talk about this, right? In your opinion, mechas are actually much better looking than those famous brand coats. Stark pouted. He looked like a lemonade now. But it's useless for you to come to us and tell me about this. You have to go to Pepper. But she doesn't understand these mechas, and she's already very busy. It's the same sentence. As long as you say it, she'll definitely be willing to listen. You've got your probationary license. Will we be able to drive my dad's car to the beach soon? In a small cafe next to the shopping street in Midtown, Gwen was slowly stirring the coffee in front of her with a spoon, and Peter, who was sitting across from her, said, My uncle doesn't have time, he was diagnosed with lung cancer in the hospital earlier. A shadow, but okay, just a less severe inflammation. You know, he smoked when he was young. Of course, their generation was like that, and so was my father. Every time his coat smelled of smoke, my mother would fight with him. Although I got a probationary driver's license, my uncle has no time, no one to accompany me, and I can't go on the road alone. I haven't driven a car yet, Peter said with a shrug. Actually, I don't know how to drive. I only need a written test for my probationary driver's license. I can barely start the car now. As for how to drive, Peter shook his head. I don't know when I will pass the road test. I don't even drive much, let alone drive. The Parker family only had an old pickup truck that Uncle Ben used to commute to and from get off work. When Peter went to Stark as an intern, he used spider silk to sway between tall buildings by himself. In the United States, Peter's age is basically a probationary driver's license. He only needs to take a written test, but if he wants to drive alone, he must pass the road test. Peter has basically never touched a car now. No matter how talented he is, it is impossible. There is nothing out of nothing, and passing the road test is a long way off. Gwen heard the disappointment in Peter's tone, and she changed the subject. I heard that the Stark Group gave you a lot of internship fees, and they plan to let you work in their group in the future. Yes, although I told my uncle and aunt that they will be responsible for my future college tuition, but apparently they are intimidated by the expensive tuition fees of some good colleges, and they want to save all the money to avoid any unforeseen circumstances. I think that's fine. Sometimes, I think they're worrying for nothing, but when some disaster really hits, I realize that their worries are not unreasonable, Gwen said, her gentleness and understanding. It always made Peter feel a little unworthy of her. If your uncle can't accompany you to practice driving, doesn't he have any friends? Or do you have any other elders who are free? Peter thought for a while, and he said, You reminded me, I do have a few candidates. The next day, in the living room of the psychological clinic, Peter said, The situation is like this. I have to touch the car before I can pass the road test. Schiller was stunned for a moment, and felt that this was not a big deal. With Peter's genius, if he drove him around by himself, he must have learned everything. So he said, No problem, I'm happy to help. I'll drive you around first, you'll watch by the side, and then you'll do it yourself. It doesn't take an afternoon to learn it all. A few dozen minutes later, Schiller was in the driver's seat, pulled out a brochure from nowhere, adjusted the steering wheel, looked at the brochure and said, Let me see, the part about steering and merging, oh, here. Wait, isn't this rule weird? Pikachu and Peter sat in the co-pilot and stared at each other. Pikachu said, I guess he didn't read the New York driver's manual before he got his driver's license. Isn't that obvious? Peter said. Then why don't you think about how he got his driver's license? Peter looked forward stiffly and said, as long as I don't think about this issue, I will feel that I am temporarily safe. In a few minutes, Peter and Schiller were standing next to the car, and the cold wind of the early New York winter made him shiver. Schiller took the phone and said, hello. Insurance company. Yes, I have already sent you the location information. Oh, it's not serious, there is a scratch on the side of the vehicle. Then he covered the receiver and said loudly to the owner of a white Audi next to him, shut up. It's all your fault. Haven't you read the New York driver's manual? I'm going straight, you can't. 20 minutes later, a sassy red supercar stopped beside the accident scene. Stark in the car was wearing sunglasses. He waved to Peter and said, let's go. Your Uncle Tony will take you there. Get a taste of the New York coastline. As he spoke, he let out another contemptuous snort and said, you should have come to me in the first place to see what this doctor looks like. How does he look like a real racing driver? The car went over 100 miles. Peter looked back at Schiller, who was on the phone with the insurance company. He still hugged Pikachu and got into Stark's sports car. It didn't take long for Pikachu to cover his ears tightly, and shouted to Peter in the strong wind, why is he racing? Don't close the roof. How do I know? Peter also shouted. It's called The Fast and the Furious. Understand? Stark also shouted. A few minutes later, the sports car also stopped by the side of the road, and Stark dug out a brochure from nowhere, and said, how did you close the top? I hardly ever opened it by hand. Pass the car. No, Jarvis, I don't need your help. Let me see. Oh, here. What? Intelligent Vehicle Management System. Why is it smart again? I'm going to drive manually. Is this teaching button or something? 20 minutes later, Steve received Peter on the side of the road with his hair blown into a bird's nest. Pikachu tugged at his tangled hair and said, I shouldn't have believed you for a ride. What nonsense. I'm just a rat, and I don't need to learn to drive, so why should I come out with you? Peter comforted him and said, it doesn't matter, Captain America will not be as unreliable as they are. Indeed, Steve drove an unremarkable black Cadillac. After Peter sat on it, Steve started the car very skillfully. At least he didn't take out a brochure from somewhere and read it while driving. Peterson take a breath. But soon, he couldn't laugh anymore. Steve's speed was getting higher and higher, and he didn't slow down when cornering. Every time he drifted, the tires would leave scorched marks on the ground, and Peter would be hit hard by another. On one side of the car door, the Pikachu in his arms almost flew out of the car window. Then, when he passed the speed bump, Steve didn't mean to slow down at all. Under Peter and Pikachu's horrified eyes, the car rushed straight past. A bump, the entire front of the car straight up. Steve still ignored it. The whole car almost flew over the speed bump. Peter was knocked up from the seat. His head hit the roof hard, and when he fell down, his waist was hit by the seat again. He screamed, oh. My waist. This time Pikachu has been photographed on the windshield. Steve still drove on his own. He saw Peter's tragic condition and said with a smile, the suspension system of this vehicle is already very advanced. When I drove on the battlefield, it was less than 20 kilometers. The arm will be knocked out, a few bruises. Learning to drive always requires this process. Speed bumps on the road are better than spike traps and anti-collision barricades on the battlefield, right? 20 minutes later, www.mtlnovel.com, Coulson drove a special shield car and picked up Steve and Peter. Steve complained and said, I take back what I just praised about this car, its quality, it's too bad, why did it turn off? Coulson said, Captain, even if you're Captain America, you can't drive without a license and speed on the main road in New York. Unlicensed driving, how could I not have a driver's license? A driver's license before 1940 doesn't count. Steve pursed his lips and said, okay, but at least I'm not speeding. The pre-1940 traffic laws don't count either. Pikachu sat in Peter's arms and said, you are really good at making friends. Peter also said unrequitedly, I thought there would always be a reliable one. That's just what you think. Coulson turned his head and asked, so you want to get a driver's license? Why didn't you call us to ask? Shield can bypass the Department of Motor Vehicles and directly issue you an official driver's license. We still have this power. Quote, Peter said, if you had told me this before today, I would have been delighted to ask you to print a formal driver's license for me immediately. But now that I have learned a lesson, I should practice slowly by myself. Before driving on the road, I will definitely memorize all the driver's manual and vehicle manual, and then update the driver's license information on time every year. Coulson seemed quite surprised. He looked at Peter admiringly and said, there are not many young people like you who are upright and don't pursue privileges. Peter said tiredly, that's probably because I'm really good at making friends. Chapter 71. In the end, it was Matt and his girlfriend Erica who actually taught Peter to drive. Matt's serious injury last time made him and Erica untie the knot and get back together. Of course, after getting rid of the brainwashing of the hand and the meeting, Erica also knew that she was impulsive at the beginning, and Peter wanted to protect Matt. She felt a little sorry for giving Peter a knife at that time, so when she asked Matt after learning that Peter's journey of learning to drive was not smooth, she and Matt took the initiative to take on the task of helping Peter train. Needless to say, Erica is indeed much more reliable than the others. Although she is also a ninja female killer, she is quite patient in teaching. On this day, Peter was trying to drive by himself. Erica and Matt were sitting in the car, and they were talking about Jinbing. I must make him look good one day, Peter said. He actually used such a despicable method to deal with you. Don't be impulsive. Jinbing and I have a very complicated grievance, and he is the most famous underworld boss in the United States. You can't deal with him now. What about Bullseye? I remember he was still in Hell's Kitchen. I'm going to beat him tonight, Peter said. Erica said, the situation is not very good now. After Jin Biao learned the news of the keel, he did not immediately go to the hand. They seem to have reached some kind of agreement. The worst thing is that Jin is not likely to hire the hand. It doesn't make sense. Shu Heihui cares about the keel so much. If they know that Jin also wants the keel, they will definitely turn against the water in the final stage. Doesn't Jin know this? This is the worst part. Even if Jin Biao knew that Shu Heihui would not cooperate with him sincerely, let alone give him the keel, he was still willing to hire them, which means that there must be something we don't know. Let Kim and hire them even at the risk of a possible reversal of the cardiac. Has he had any big business recently? Erica said with a serious face. If you have to talk about it, you should also know about his drug business. You mean the plan he abandoned before? What are you talking about? Peter controlled the steering wheel. He couldn't understand the riddles Matt and Erica played. At this time, the little spider has not yet faced Jin Bing, and now he is mainly fighting against Jin Bing. Or Daredevil Matt. Jin Bing's drug business on the East Coast has reached a bottleneck. He has seized the vast majority of the market, but he is not satisfied. I got a piece of information before that Kim wanted to target younger students and use the people he has won in various universities and high schools to sell some potentially addictive drugs to younger children. In this way, one day, he'll break through his all-time sales. Peter slammed the steering wheel hard, scolded in a low voice, and then said, from the day I started wanting to be a hero, there have always been people who constantly refreshed my cognitive ceiling. Why do they have no humanity at all? Quote, you'll see more of these monsters in the future, Matt said. The calmness in his tone made Peter feel a power. The car drove into a main street from the main road. It was a little late today. Peter wanted to drive Matt's car back first, and then resume the practice the next day. But just as they were just turning, a strong light swayed over. Peter instinctively touched his eyes, and then the spider sensed a move, and he immediately opened the door and jumped out. With a bang, several darts pierced the windshield and hit the driver's seat and the co-pilot. Peter looked up and saw a few shadows jumping down from a nearby tall building, and with a burst of black smoke, they approached the car in a few flashes. After a period of training, Peter wasn't that completely dumbfounded. He first rolled on the spot, dodging a row of darts, and then jumped hard, knocking down a ninja who fell on the roof. His strength was so great that the ninja turned into a cloud of smoke and disappeared in an instant. Then, another ninja pulled the car door, but there was nothing in the car. A dagger flashed coldly. Erica's figure appeared on the side of the car. She killed a ninja first, backhand waved, and a few darts scared again ran another. Matt wasn't in the car either. His 5 senses were too many for ordinary people. When the dart was still flying, he heard the movement. He killed a ninja at the back of the car, walked over with a cane and said, "These guys really, it's very troublesome, we only killed one last time, and they all ran away this time." Peter shook his numb wrist and said, "What's the matter? They attacked you recently." "Erica and I moved because the original house was often infested with these fleas." Peter said, "I'm sorry. I've been a little busy recently, so I didn't go to your place. I knew you were in trouble. I should have gone. It's best if you don't come. These people can't be dealt with brute force at all. Even if Erica and I want to kill one, we have to set traps. In this kind of encounter, they just disappear. You can't deal with the ninja's escape technique, you need to use a special escape method to break it." Erica also carried the dagger, and she got into the car again. "Do we still have to drive? What if they come again? Didn't you find out? They didn't come to kill us, they just came to harass us." Peter also got into the car. This time Erica drove the car. Peter said, "Then what's the use of them doing this? They can't hurt you. Although we are not afraid of them, my neighbors are not. They know that in order to protect ordinary people, I have to move frequently, which will greatly interfere with me going out to attack their industries." Erica continued with Matt's words, "This is the old way of hand and will often use, whoever opposes them, they will send these immortal ninjas to harass them without interruption until they completely leave the area. These ninjas have low attack power, don't kill people very often, and are elusive, leaving no evidence, so the officials in that place have little reason to deal with them. This is the genius of Jin Bing. He used these ninjas in the hand and the society to harass me, so that I have no time to hinder his industrial upgrade. He knows that even if he kills him, he will not be able to kill him for a while. I will only receive more violent revenge, but this kind of harassment like a fly can slow me down to a great extent." Erica turned the steering wheel and said, "Perhaps this is one of the reasons why he chose to cooperate with the hand. Your previous actions have caused him too much damage. Even if Bullseye is almost successful, it will not take long for you to appear again, and unplug several of his underground casinos faster. He already knows that it's a better choice to send someone to harass you constantly, rather than hiring a killer to kill you and always fail." Matt sighed. He was also a little helpless about the current situation. These ninjas are very annoying. They can slow down their heartbeats, so that Matt can't notice their specific location for a while, and they run to his house every now and then, either throwing darts or setting fires, causing a lot of trouble. Landlord, it doesn't matter if Matt is being harassed or not, they just chase people away. Matt, a lawyer, used to have a nice apartment in Manhattan to live in. His hut in Hell's Kitchen was just a stronghold, but those ninjas always came and made trouble, so he had to move and move again and again. Indeed, it took him a lot of energy. Daredevil only has 24 hours a day. He originally sacrificed his sleep time to fight crime, but now, he has to write a complaint during the day, participate in court hearings, and move house at night. Wandering, not only the efficiency drops seriously, but also the energy is somewhat poor. Jin Bing has grasped Daredevil's weakness very well. Matt is still a social person. Once he encounters such trouble, in order to maintain his social identity, he will definitely spend a lot of time. Erica also has a lot of troubles herself. The Hand Union is very the traitor, and she hasn't returned to her life for too long. Jin Ning is also suspicious, and Bullseye keeps looking for opportunities to kill her and take back her self-status. Peter said, "Although I can't help you deal with these ninjas, at least I can go to trouble with the target head first." "You have to be careful." Erica said, "Bullseye is not an ordinary person. He is a master of acrobatics, with strong physical skills and many tricks." "That's right, I haven't dealt with any decent opponent yet. Did that rich man Stark make a suit for you? If you want to deal with Bullseye, you'd better wear it all the time. He is very good at using hidden weapons, but if his hidden weapons can't penetrate your suit, then it will be much easier to deal with. The suit is still being tested. Yesterday I received a call from Mr. Stark and asked me to go to the building. I'm afraid it will be completed within a few days." With that said, the car drove to the street near Matt's residence, and a few people got out of the car. Matt said, "You better think clearly. Once you shoot at Bullseye, you will definitely enter Jin Bing's field of vision." www.mtlnovel.com. the fight against Kim is a real life and death fight, not something you can beat a few robbers or thieves in Hell's Kitchen. He will kill you with all the cruel means you can imagine or can't imagine. He may become the nightmare of your life. No matter where you go, you have to beware of his assassination at all times, just like me. Peter stood on the other side of the car and looked at Matt. The street lights on the street were all turned off, and only the windows of the car faintly reflected the lights in the residential building. Peter asked him, "Then do you regret it? When you were lying on the bed in the operating room, did you regret that you were involved in all this?" "If I hadn't been involved in all of this, I'd be in some high-end apartment downtown by now, preparing for the case that's going to go to trial the next day. Maybe I'm thinking about when to discuss an engagement with my girlfriend. Maybe you may also think, do you want to have a dog?" Erica said, "But now you're like a rat crossing the street. Let alone a dog, you are raising a tropical fish, and its body will appear at the door of your bedroom the next day." I chose to get involved in these things at the time, without any deliberation at all. What do you think? I thought about it for a year before I started it. In fact, with hatred and blood, I plunged into this bottomless abyss. Matt said, "Although I very much hope that you will become a superhero, because your ability can save many people, that's why I'm willing to teach you. But I'm not trying to lie to you. I have to remind you that going against Kim means you will never go back. You must be both just and strong. If you lack one, there is only one dead end." Peter's actions against the bullseye were not smooth. The first problem he encountered was that he couldn't find where the bullseye was. It's very true that there are a lot of floating people in Hell's Kitchen. Even if he is Spider-Man, he can't check the household registration of the entire regional kitchen in such a short time. As Erica said, Bullseye is very cunning. He knows that he has a lot of enemies, so his whereabouts are not regular. Peter just stared at him at the door of a nightclub, and the others disappeared the next day. There are so many in Hell's Kitchen building, so many gangsters, it's really hard for Peter to find Bullseye's lair. Only now did Peter understand how much effort Matt had put in when he attacked Jinbing's property. Peter felt a little frustrated. Before, he often went in and out of Hell's Kitchen, and occasionally he would fight some robbers or thieves on the edge of this area, and occasionally beat 2 drug dealers with guns. However, organized crime and stragglers are 2 completely different concepts. The reason why some gangs are difficult to deal with, and the reason why some criminal organizations are difficult to eradicate is because their local power is intertwined, and everyone is their eyes. This is for Peter. The investigation has caused great difficulties, and it is clear that Bullseye has been alerted. But Peter would not give up. He is smart and realizes where his strengths lie. After ramming around in Hell's Kitchen like a headless fly, Peter began to seek the help of modern technology. One day at noon, Schiller watched Peter slam a huge box onto the table. After opening it, there was a strangely shaped computer inside. The computer was integrated with the box, the keyboard was strangely shaped, there was no mouse, and a lot of complicated wires and antennas were connected. Peter kept fiddling there, the blue light on the screen reflected on his face. Pikachu also stood aside to watch. He said, "Do you want to check the mobile phone signal? Monitor the communication content of Hell's Kitchen." That's right, the people here definitely don't have any network and signal encryption awareness. I collected a bunch of junk from the father of one of my classmates, and simply assembled it. Although it's not very clever, it's enough. But with so many mobile phones and network signals, even if you intercept and crack them all, don't you still have to find out who is the bullseye one by one? This is what I'm doing. In fact, I've tried listening to the signal, and it's not difficult. I'm now writing a program to intelligently capture the communication content. Schiller folded his arms beside him, looked at the 2 of them and said, "So when did you 2 plan to get together?" Pikachu said while holding a jar of peanut butter, "Don't forget, I'm a detective, and this kid hired me. That's right, I need someone to help me. I need someone to sit in the back and help me keep an eye on the backstage." "I really appreciate you choosing a mouse over me," Schiller said. "Oh, don't get me wrong, Doctor," Peter said a little embarrassedly. "I always feel that this kind of thing is not too troublesome for you. I plan to do it myself, otherwise why should I assemble this computer myself? In Stark Building there are all kinds of advanced computers, let alone listening to Hell's Kitchen, even listening to the entire Manhattan city is no problem." Peter quickly tapped the keyboard and said seriously, I found that I really can't rely on others too much. When I listened to Matt talking about his experience of fighting criminals, I thought that was actually the case, wasn't it just beating people? Can there be? How difficult is it? But when I practiced it myself, I realized that it is really difficult. The difficulty is not to cut a thread, but to sort out the thread from the mess, and then accurately find the deadly thread. Schiller applauded him and said, Did anyone tell you? You were really talented. Peter was just born to be a superhero. He is strong, kind, and more importantly, has a wit that most people don't have. Soon, the screen flashed blue light, and Peter stopped his fingers and said, It's done, now I have to wait a few hours. As long as he sends a signal about his identity within this time, I can grab his tail. Already. What are you going to do after that? Attack in front of you? Pikachu asked. No. Peter shook his head. Actually, the captain told me a lot of tactics before, and I didn't listen too much at that time, but when it came time to use it, I thought back and found that many of them may be helpful. With that said, Peter took out a map from his school bag, unfolded it, pointed to one part of it, and said, Look here, this is Hell's Kitchen, do you see these lines I drew? Before, I found a map of New York's underground waterways from an old newsstand, and I drew the part of Hell's Kitchen on this map. It can be seen that the sewers lead to most of the main buildings of Hell's Kitchen, and the exits are also distributed evenly, from the southernmost point A to the northernmost point B. The distance of each manhole cover to be passed is almost the same, showing a uniform annular distribution. It's a natural offensive line. I just need to go from here, see? This red dot I marked. I go in from here, at the speed of my running, in less than 5 minutes, I can be in near the center circle of buildings in the kitchen. The second circle of buildings will take about 10 minutes, and even the outermost buildings will only take less than 15 minutes. As long as I catch the signal, I can appear in the building where Bullseye is located within 15 minutes at most. Pikachu said, I guess he won't choose the nearest or farthest lap, but should be in the middle part of Hell's Kitchen like us. I think so too. Although the most central part is Jinbian's industry, Bullseye also knows that he will definitely be stared at there, and he must have a stronghold of his own on the periphery. It's easier to catch him there than to sneak into a place where there's a lot of gold and thugs. Peter is really talented in computers. It didn't take a few hours, less than 20 minutes, when the screen suddenly turned on again. Peter hurriedly started typing again. He paused to take a look, then jumped up and picked up his bag. Run out, push the door and shout, Keep an eye on me. Use the walkie-talkie to call me if there is any movement. Pikachu gave him a reassuring gesture. Peter jumped down from the nearest sewer entrance. As he expected, New York's sewers were in all directions. He looked at the map and ran a few minutes faster than expected. When Peter lifted the manhole cover and came out, this was a street in the south of Hell's Kitchen. Schiller's psychiatry clinic was in the north, a little far away, and it was also a few streets away from Matt's hut. Bullseye is quite good at choosing places. The location where the signal came from is a garbage dump, and there are usually few people coming to this ghost place. But this place is too friendly to Peter. The junkyard has scattered terrain, all kinds of garbage that can be stuck with spider silk and used as weapons, and several garbage trucks that can be used as bunkers to avoid hidden weapons. Although Peter didn't know any terrain tactics, he instinctively felt that fighting in this place must be easy. He walked in silently along the edge of the garbage dump, and when he was focused, the spider sense became more sensitive, and Peter's mind even vaguely showed a three-dimensional environment map within a few meters around him. In a small two-story building behind the junkyard, Peter clawed at the wall and climbed to the roof in a few strokes. Then he was hung with a spider silk and looked into the window with his head down. Bullseye was indeed in the room, smoking a cigarette and talking to one of his subordinates. Peter moved his nose. He smelled the stench of marijuana. Looking at the smoky room, he retracted the spider silk and took out a red piece from his backpack. The blue and white battle suit, whispered, I forgot to ask Mr. Stark to add a gas mask to me, this Hell's Kitchen. After putting on the spider suit, Peter didn't hesitate, grabbed the spider silk, and broke through the window. Bullseye's subordinate, who was closer to the window, was knocked unconscious by Peter before he turned around. Bullseye dropped the cigarette in his hand, cursed, and then blocked Peter's punch with his arm. If Peter were an ordinary person, the action of the bullseye would be very effective for defense, but the power brought by the spider mutation, even if it has not been fully developed, cannot be blocked by ordinary people. After receiving a punch from Peter, Bullseye flew upside down. But he is also worthy of being a master of acrobatics. He twisted his waist and rolled in the air, and he landed smoothly. He ran quickly to the back door. Peter followed him, www.mtlnovel.com, but the smell and the smoke in the room made him less sensitive until there was a click. The back door was opened, Peter chased it out, and the oncoming one is 3 darts. Peter didn't dare to pick it up. He rolled to the side, then stretched out his hand to shoot the spider silk, swung directly from the wall of the back door, and landed in the garbage dump. Bullseye was standing on a hill made of garbage. "Ha, where is this Leng Tuking? Thinking that wearing a strange dress, you can go to Hell's Kitchen to make trouble." Peter ignored him at all, and kicked him directly after landing. When Steve told Peter about tactics before, Schiller was also there. He told Peter a very effective tactic: the villain will always die if he talks too much. As soon as the opponent opens his mouth, he will punch him decisively. What kind of martial arts do you tell the villain? This tactic was obviously effective, and Bullseye didn't say anything, so he had to hurriedly roll to the side to dodge. Peter resisted the urge to talk to him, and it was just a punch, and Bullseye was a little overwhelmed. He found that the boy on the opposite side was surprisingly strong. Just shaking slightly, Spider-Man punched him, and he flew out directly. If it wasn't for Bullseye's good balance and flexibility, he could land smoothly every time, and he would have been caught and beaten long ago. Seeing that the situation was not good, Bullseye threw a dart out. Spider-Man was dodging sideways. Bullseye took out a ball from his pocket and fell to the ground. After a slight hiss sound, a burst of smoke filled the air. This was not a smoke bomb that blocked his sight, but a miniature tear gas bomb. An extremely irritating smell made Peter almost suffocate in an instant. He covered his mouth and nose and coughed desperately twice, and then came back to his senses. The bullseye was gone. In the Shield Lounge, Steve pointed to a picture on the whiteboard and said, "As I said before, the so-called tactical literacy is not only about making a battle plan in advance, but more importantly, it is also necessary to understand the enemy synchronously, his intentions, and even thought of his course of action one step ahead of him. The reason why your last battle failed is also because you didn't do it. You chose to climb to the top of the building first, which is not bad. It is indeed very important to seize the commanding heights, but then you made a fatal mistake. First, you rushed in recklessly without finding out how many exits this house has. Secondly, when fighting in a building, we often do not recommend using a high-rise raid method. Once you start to drive the enemy from a high place, he will instinctively run down. If there is an exit on the lower floor, then he can be safe to leave the building. The correct way is to either encircle and fight from top to bottom, or make a floor-by-floor raid from the bottom to the top. If you drive the enemy from the bottom, he can only run up, and then choose to jump out of the window or be trapped indoors, and can't use it. Leave the ground exit, do you understand? On the coffee table in front, Peter asked while writing, "But if I break the door, it will make a noise. What if they are alert? I went in through the window to catch them off guard." Your thinking is right. The most important thing in a raid operation in a building is speed. Like I said just now, if you want to take a bottom-up approach, you must first find out how many in the building. Exit, block the exit before you start, and then break in through the window. Actually, I don't recommend you to use this method. Although you are blessed with unique conditions, the opponent is fighting in his own home field, and he has a deeper understanding of the room and building structure than you. Although you hit them by surprise, but you entered a strange building, and the surrounding environment is completely unfamiliar to you. Once there are any traps in the room, you may not be able to react quickly. Peter just wanted to say that he had spider sense, but after thinking about it, Steve made sense. Although he saw 2 people in the room when he hung it on the window, if there was an ambush in Bullseye, he would fall. Cup, what if dozens of big men rushed out of nowhere? His spider sensing on the spot response was okay, but it wasn't a divination technique, and it couldn't see through. Peter wrote and drew in the notebook, and Steve continued, "Besides, you already knew that your opponent is a wicked scoundrel. You said just now that you think the junkyard is very suitable for you to fight him, but don't forget, he stayed there much longer than you can. This kind of cunning enemy must have been rehearsed in your mind long ago. Dozens of escape routes. Even if he didn't use tear gas at you, as long as you were distracted a little, he would definitely run away. Peter sighed and said, I thought I had planned very well, but I didn't expect there to be so many mistakes. It seems that I did not lose unjustly. Steve came over and sat next to him and patted his shoulders and said, It's normal, you're already very talented. You've never seen those guys in the army who didn't even dare to go downhill, stand up one by one on the roof trembling with fright, let alone an airborne raid. You can do that from the start, and you're much better than most of them. Peter put away the notebook and said, I will never let him run away again next time. An hour later, in the laboratory of the Stark building, Stark was holding an antenna and said, although the series connection method you use is stable, it is completely unable to maximize the effectiveness of the antenna. Don't tell me about raw material restrictions. Didn't I still use a pile of scrap metal to make mechas when I was in Afghanistan? When I was 6 years old, I could make a computer that is much better than yours. Also, your understanding of the word intelligence, of the intelligent grasping system is too superficial. Do you think that writing an automatic screening system is called intelligence? Why don't you try to write a complete artificial intelligence logic? Stark put down the wire. He snapped his fingers, a screen slowly lowered from the roof. Stark pointed to the map above and said, Look here, this is Hell's Kitchen, right? It has a spindle shape as a whole, so your signal coverage can be completely different from a perfect circle, but use different wave frequencies to maximize efficiency, like this. In addition, you can find a stronghold and build a simple signal tower on it to monitor the designated Hell's Kitchen signal. Peter pointed at the map of Hell's Kitchen thoughtfully with a laser pointer, and he said, I've found the central meeting point of Hell's Kitchen, which is the center of the underground waterway that I used to travel, and you don't think we could a signaling device be placed there? What should I do? I think the method I'm using now is very stable, but it's not efficient enough. A few hours later, it was dark, and Schiller was about to close the door when Peter squeezed in through the crack of the door. I heard that your actions were not going well, Schiller said. Seeing Peter nod in frustration, Schiller said, although you have this technology to monitor other people's cell phone signals, I don't think this is the best way. Indeed, this method is simple and rude and effective, but the problem is that it is too simple and rude, and you ignore many details. Bullseye's trail is not as completely invisible as you think. You just lack a little awareness of detection and anti-detection. Peter sat down on the sofa. He took a sip. Schiller took out his medical record book, and said, Do you know where the most well-informed place in Hell's Kitchen is? Peter shook his head. I ask you, what two things cannot be avoided? Death and taxes. Yes, then what do you think these 2 points correspond to in Hell's Kitchen? I haven't heard of a hospital in Hell's Kitchen, or a tax administration. Peter shook his head and said, You have to know that it is almost impossible for you to successfully fight crime without any knowledge of the rules of Hell's Kitchen. Peter said, Well, I actually thought about it last night. I was a little too impulsive. When I thought about what happened to Matt, I wanted to beat that guy right away. Hell's Kitchen does not have a decent hospital or authority, but after the gangs here are merged, the gang members will be injured. Will there be doctors to treat them after they are injured? Where do these doctors come from? Who are they hired by? Yes, will there be any special information? Hell's Kitchen doesn't really have a tax bureau, but the gang receives so many protection fees and has so many properties. Do you expect these gang bosses who haven't graduated from junior high school to settle the accounts themselves? Where did their accountants come from? When will they come? Who among them knows which gang boss? Did they meet the person you're looking for not too long ago? Other than that, what about the lorry drivers who traverse the streets of Hell's Kitchen every day? What about taxi and bus drivers? Even if they are gangsters, they always have to eat. Where did Bullseye order the meal? Has he hired a chef recently? What's more, has he been to any strip clubs? Or hired prostitutes? Schiller pointed at the map that Peter opened and said, A human being can never live without traces in this world. If a person in a society lives in a society, he must interact with other people in this society. Maybe, the investigation you imagined is to use a magnifying glass to look for footprints, or he has to leave some physical traces in order for you to find out. But in fact, every person he has seen and every word he has said leaves more or less traces. Schiller shook his head and said, this bullseye is not an anti-reconnaissance master. If you are willing to show more patience to investigate these things, you may not even have to fight him. Reconnaissance is not a prelude to battle, but also an elegy for requiem. If one day, you can really master this technique, you will understand that to deal with these criminals, you don't have to spend your physical strength to shake your fists. Reading www.uikonshu.com. I'm not referring to the use of narcotics, or the use of drugs in wine or food. If you can figure out all of a person's social relationships, and understand every trace he left in the society, you can find countless ways to leverage strength from these relationships. You don't have to cut any thread, you can dexterously disassemble all the intricate strands and tie them into the way you want. Peter didn't write or draw in the notebook this time. He said, I don't understand this very well, but maybe one day when I use it, I'll remember it. Actually, I still prefer to swing my fists. I always feel that when I use these methods, the situation must have been terrible. Finally, accompanied by the sound of the rolling gate outside the clinic falling, Peter said. 2 days later, a man with a target mark on his head was thrown at the door of the Manhattan Police Department. On the roof of the building opposite, Spider-Man was standing there, watching the police bring Bullseye in. The streets of New York at dusk were still bustling with people. This episode attracted the attention of many pedestrians, but soon, they bowed their heads and walked past. You surprise me. Matt's voice came from behind Spider-Man. He held his cane and said, it took only a few days to abolish Kim and the biggest eyeliner in Hell's Kitchen. How did you do it? Did it? Peter stood on the edge of the roof and turned around when he heard Matt's voice. He took off the hood of his battle suit, and the fluttering hair turned into floating golden threads in the light of the setting sun behind him. He smiled, with the childishness and cheerfulness unique to his age. He said, that's probably because I'm really good at making friends. On a neither sunny nor warm morning in Gotham City, Gotham University students take their psychology final exams. When Evans handed out the papers, there was screaming and howling in the classroom, and then, outside the door, the sound of leather shoes stepping on the marble floor sounded, and in an instant, the classroom became silent. While packing up the umbrella in his hand, Schiller walked into the classroom. Seeing that everyone was working hard, he nodded with satisfaction. Then he put his umbrella on the ground, put his hand on the handle of the umbrella, stood in the center of the classroom and said, this exam will take 1 hour and 40 minutes. In theory, you can hand in the papers in advance, but I am very invigilated here. Boring. I will definitely mark the papers you handed in advance. At the very least, you have to make sure that what you write is enough for me to read until you walk out the door of this classroom. Also, although I didn't ask you to sit apart, it's best not to talk to each other. Please write neatly on the scroll, and no squiggles are allowed. The most important thing is, please write your name clearly, I mean the legal name. Don't let me repeat the same emphasis on not writing nicknames as I did during the first week of school. Okay, let's start answering the questions. Then the entire classroom fell silent, except for the rustling of the pen tip on the scroll surface. Gotham University has never had a classroom with such a strong learning atmosphere. Bruce looked up when he was writing, and sitting in front of him on the right was the nephew of the East Side hyena. This guy was smoking and drinking in his early 10 years. Fights and fights, is a pure bad boy. But at this time he was sitting in his seat, and 10 minutes later, he was still buried in writing, or his brain full of alcohol and tobacco was still able to support him to write. Sitting on Bruce's left is a famous graffiti boy from Gotham University. He is good at spray painting. He often messes up the walls everywhere. Even when Selden enforced the campus alcohol ban, he even sprayed his big head graffiti into the president's office, on the walls of the hallway. He was almost on the verge of not being able to write the first essay question at this meeting, and he was drawing various patterns on the scroll. Bruce glanced with his good eyesight and found that he was painting Schiller, but different from those spoof graffiti. Schiller under his brush, with his back facing a black sun, his hands open, some particle like the pattern is surrounding him, and the whole picture looks weird but handsome, but I don't know if Schiller is willing to see his meticulous creation and give him 2 extra points. After half an hour, more than 2/3 of the people were still writing, which is simply a miracle of Gotham University. In the past, during the final exam, first of all, there would be a few thorns who were directly absent, and the seats would definitely be full. 2 minutes after the exam started, someone had finished writing their names, stood up and left. 10 minutes after the start of the test, many people will have finished the simple and easy to write multiple choice questions, put down the pen and hand in the paper in advance, and leave directly. In the past, after 20 minutes, there were only a few people left in the entire classroom. Even if they stayed, they weren't to write those essay questions. It was just that they didn't make arrangements after that, and they just took advantage of the quietness of the classroom to sleep. But now, Bruce looked up at his watch. 40 minutes had passed, and half of the people were still writing. No one dared to submit the papers in advance. Even though most of them had already racked their brains and were on the verge of being incapacitated, most of them were still biting their pens and sitting in their seats, hoping that their small brains would be able to squeeze out more. A few words to write them on the paper, trying to make the professor less angry when he sees their answer somewhere between illiterate and semi-literate. In fact, even the introductory textbooks of psychology, the proper nouns, names, theories, and definitions involved are difficult. Not to mention this bunch of ignorant Gotham University students, even those students from famous American universities, must preview before giving lectures, otherwise they will easily fall into the dilemma of a blank brain. Reciting, for these students whose brains have been inactive for a long time, is a difficult task in itself, let alone a surprise recitation within a week or two. After an hour passed, most of the people had stopped writing, and Bruce wrote down the list of those who were still working the scratch paper, which would be the backbone of the psychology society he formed in the future. After thinking for a while, he still wrote the name of the graffiti boy. After all, the club always has a publicity artist. After waiting for 1 hour and 40 minutes, when the winding up spit out from the mouth of the professor sitting in front slammed heavily on the floor, there was a sound of exhalation one after another in the classroom. Obviously they were going crazy. After the papers were collected, no one dared to leave, until Schiller nailed the papers, checked the number of copies, checked the names, and left the classroom with a stack of papers. The classroom was like a bomb that suddenly exploded. Boom, exploded. Oops, I can't fill in most of the blank questions, and it's over. I stepped up to memorize the definition of psychology last night, but I didn't take the test. If I knew earlier, I shouldn't have wasted so much time ahead. I wrote the answer to the second essay question on the fourth question. My God, what can I do? I definitely won't get a single point for the essay question. Which one of you wrote the graduate application? Evans, have you written it? Yesterday my dad told me that if my brain can go to graduate school, I might as well expect our dog to climb trees. But my dog is a corgi. I still owe 2 papers that I haven't handed in. I have to complete them before the holiday, otherwise I will definitely be nervous this holiday. Don't think about having fun. A few people gathered in front of Bruce's desk. They were the first group members invited by Bruce. Rainey, the graffiti boy with a fluorescent yellow forehead guard, said, "The professor will like my drawings." Artistic people. But he might prefer to see your correct answer, Bruce said. Come on, I don't know anything, and reciting contaminates my brain. Rainey touched his nose, a typical German with green eyes and a little freckles, dressed in reggae-style clothes. And who said that wasn't the right answer? Who said that you have to write to answer the question? The same goes for drawing. I'll pass. Okay, I'll pay you to paint a poster for me. It's bigger and more impactful. It's used to promote this club. The price is whatever you want, but I hope it must be shocking enough. Bruce said. Rainey snapped his fingers and said, "Rich guy, you've found the right person. There's no one in Gotham who knows how to shock people better than me." Several people's heads huddled together and muttered. What, you mean you want to? You're a genius. Add me one, and I'll come too. It's a big surprise, yes, I'm sure. Maybe in the face of this, he will give us a pass. A few days later, Schiller was accumulating anger notes while checking papers. Although he had already expected the level of these ignorant students at Gotham University, he still did not expect that they would be able to pass the exam like this. Since he didn't want to be continuously polluted by these academic garbage, Schiller planned to work overtime today, pass all the papers in one go, and then give most of them a failing grade. Suddenly, he heard a high-pitched honk from the office building's window, a bit like a fire siren, but shorter and sharper than that. Schiller stood up, looked out the window, and found that some lights were shaking. It was just dark, and it was far from the time when the street lights came on, and most of the teachers and students had not left the school. He heard a commotion downstairs, as if someone were calling his last name, and Schiller put down his pen, left his desk, and walked to the window. The entire side of the building on the opposite side was covered by a huge curtain. Schiller heard people say that it was a wall renovation. He didn't walk that way very often, so he didn't pay much attention to it. But as a result, just as he walked to the window, the curtain on the opposite wall fell instantly. There seemed to be a huge graffiti on it. It was as high as a 7-story building. The side shot is as bright as day. It is indeed a huge graffiti, with Schiller's back at the bottom, and a black sun full of countless strange patterns on the top. The sun is surrounded by several circles of flames composed of golden patterns. Schiller's figure is standing on the black sun in front of. Schiller's figure was almost merged into the background of the black sun, or the huge sun, like his shadow. Schiller stood in front of the window. His eyes were first shaken by the high-power spotlights, and when he opened his eyes, he saw such a picture. Schiller. Symbiote. Wow. The side of the entire graffiti reads, "Join the psychology club, face the heart of the people, face the black sun blue ghost rainy." Schiller bowed his head and saw a group of people standing at the bottom of the building waving at him excitedly, most of the psychology students at Gotham University, including Bruce Wayne. Schiller looked up again and looked at the black sun composed of countless strange patterns. It was full of a bizarre and terrifying aesthetics, and people couldn't take their eyes away when they saw it, as if their souls were sucked in by it. Horror, weird, bizarre, absurd, but full of beauty that makes people deeply immersed in it. Schiller recalled that Gotham originally meant the village of fools, and it was indeed full of all kinds of absurd fools. But at the same time, it is full of talents of all kinds, with unparalleled talents and fascinating vitality. Schiller is indeed a little fascinated. This kind of bold and eccentric absurd action is full of special vitality that is not found anywhere in the world, like the terrifying vines climbing up from the bottomless abyss, and like the top artworks of countless masters. Schiller knows more than these students, but he just realized that he hasn't learned one thing yet. Indeed, he hasn't learned Gotham yet. Everyone who lives here is crazy, but at the same time sober. This city of darkness, www.mtlnovel.com, does not need anyone to correct it. They live so madly in the abyss, living out a twisted and strange vitality. This kind of vitality grows from the darkness, and the people here use madness as a blade, so accurately point directly to anyone's heart. Schiller stared straight at the black sun. He thought, perhaps, the people here are incomparable geniuses, and the only fool is himself, everyone who tries to act as a savior outside the comics. The people here can see through their professors like mind reading with their brains that don't have the slightest knowledge of psychological theory. The black sun is also the sun, and this is a more accurate profile of Schiller. Schiller's incarnation is indeed not a scorching sun, but a sun that is neither bright nor hot, a black sun. After a few minutes, Schiller wrote a line of words on the foggy glass with his fingers, "You have passed." In an instant, violent cheers erupted from downstairs, and under the black sun, it was as if the people lit by this never-bright star were reveling for the celebration of the new life. During the winter vacation, the faculty apartments and doctoral student apartments of Gotham University were still open, and most of the labs continued to work. Schiller had only Gotham University faculty apartments in the entire Gotham City, and no other houses, so when the holiday was announced, he had nowhere to go and continued to stay in the school's office to write papers. The results of the University of Gotham's psychology department were not very satisfactory, which made his evaluation score not very high, so he had to try to post a few more articles to improve the score of this experience on his resume. Most of the students at Gotham University are idle and very loose, and most of the people live in the local area. Gotham is not too big, and most of the students are in a state of being on call. Bruce took advantage of the holiday time to organize the psychology club. He seems to have a lot of enthusiasm for it, but it is no wonder that because he needs to disguise, his test scores can only be regarded as mid-range, but he also has a lot of enthusiasm. I am very eager to learn some skills from Schiller, so it is a good choice to organize clubs with the ability to banknotes. On this day, Bruce was holding the materials prepared by the club and planned to give it to Schiller. He stood at the door of Schiller's office. Before he could knock on the door, he heard the voice of a phone call inside. "Have you considered a frontal lobectomy?" Inhumane. Could it be humane to let him run wild in the hospital? What happened to Mrs. Adela? Still refusing to wear a straitjacket? Well, let me introduce you to a gangster thug from Mary Street, let them go there to work as nurses, and it's done in a few moments. That Noffman also refused to receive treatment. He didn't take medicine. I read his medical records before. He has a grudge against the local gangster. Later I will call their boss and ask the leader to greet him. For a moment, he will definitely be happy to cooperate with you. Quote. Don't worry about those drunks, if they are sick, alcohol will tell them. Someone came to sell alcohol. Vodka delivered medicine. I remember that Douglas under your command used to work for Gotham's largest liquor dealer. He wrote a letter to his former boss's mansion and said that the Godfather told him not to sell alcohol to the mental hospital, because he thought those people weren't crazy enough. The patient in the back alley of Elk Street, he has a dispute over the inheritance of the family's property. You don't have to get involved in this mess, just let them solve it by themselves. We accept lunatics here, but we don't accept poor people with bad stomachs. Tomorrow I'll bring my students there. You hold on for one more day, what? No, your worries are a bit unnecessary. One of the students I brought is the son of Gotham's Godfather, and the other. At this time, the door suddenly opened by itself. Schiller looked back and saw Bruce standing at the door. He said, "The other is the richest man in the world." At this point, after listening to the content of the call, Bruce especially wanted to say that he still didn't want to go. This Professor Schiller sounds too much like a crazy doctor. Putting down the phone and seeing Bruce froze there, Schiller said, "Come in, I have provided you with a good internship opportunity, for the sake of your good management of the club." Bruce pursed his lips, then opened his mouth, hesitated, and said, "Your treatment style is quite different from what I imagined." "What do you imagine?" "It's like giving you a class, talking at length to patients, telling them the psychological knowledge written in the textbook." Quote. Isn't it? At least it shouldn't be. At least it shouldn't be to call the gangster and let the gangster threaten, right? Bruce thought, is this psychotherapy? This is physical therapy. Schiller shook his head. Criminal psychology is a type of applied psychology, and the focus of applied psychology is application, not psychology. If it was in the metropolis, I might try to have a good talk with them, but this is Gotham, and most of the mentally ill people in Arkham Asylum were forcibly sent in after a failed gang fight. What about the other half? Drinkers who drank their brains, drug addicts who took drugs to the point of insanity, and people who took the initiative to avoid vendettas. Isn't there a mental patient? Schiller put his hands on his hips, tapped the table with his hands, and said, "In a large mental hospital, why build a small mental hospital for mental patients?" Bruce wanted to answer, but after thinking about it carefully, what Schiller said seemed very reasonable. Gotham doesn't need a mental hospital at all. Everyone here is mentally ill, and there are not many normal people. And what can I do? Cure the mental illness. Let them be positive and optimistic, and become a kind and normal person. After being discharged from the hospital, they can be sent directly to the crematorium. Anyway, they will not live for 3 days. Bruce asked, "How is Jonathan?" "Go see him yourself tomorrow," said Schiller. Bruce sat across from him and said, "I've been thinking about that proposal recently, and I think I do need a solid base. It should be a complex, a prison, a warehouse, a monitoring room and a laboratory. And I'm going to build a comprehensive surveillance system to cover the whole of Gotham City, and after Rainey inspired me before, I think I can also design a special pattern for myself to let people know who I am and know them. Who should I turn to? Have you considered bats? Of course bats. I know it's a bat. What I'm asking is, do you really want to fight with this city to the end?" Schiller tapped the tip of his pen on the table and said, "Now you have room to fall back, and Batman is just a weird vigilante, but once you start taking full control of the city, it gives everyone a call to fight criminals. If you have the chance, then you will have no way out. When people know that there is a mysterious and powerful hero that they can call around, one day they will take it for granted as part of their life, and you will be involved in some unimaginable things. Go in the middle of trouble, and at that time, even if you want to throw it away, it's impossible. I think I'm ready, but what makes me doubt right now is if I'm capable of doing it," Bruce said. Schiller got up and started, clearing up the papers on the desk, saying, "Of course you have, and you're more than capable of doing it all. Why do you always seem to have confidence in me? Because you're Batman. After speaking, Schiller stood up and left. The next day, Schiller and Bruce set off from Gotham University and drove to Arkham Psychiatric Hospital. Originally, Evans had to come to the school to meet them first, but there were some problems in Falcone's industry that his son needed to deal with. He had to start the internship 2 days later, so only Schiller and Schiller were left. Bruce. Taking Batman to Arkham Asylum for an internship sounds a bit weird, but in fact, the Arkham Asylum in this period was not a paradise for lunatic people who were born in large numbers. Most are not really mentally ill. Because of this, the original attending Dr. Brand has been driven crazy. He is an old classmate of Schiller, who came only 2 months earlier than Schiller. In his words, the inaugural experience of Arkham Psychiatric Hospital was the biggest hurdle in his life. As Schiller drove, he recalled what Brand told him yesterday about the current situation in the mental hospital. The car had not been far from the university when it was blocked on the road. A straight road of less than 200 meters took almost half an hour to drive. Schiller thought that New York was already blocked enough, but he did not expect Gotham to be even better during the peak hours. The basic traffic rule of Gotham is that life and death depend on fate and wealth. Most of the people here drive with a car that is valuable but not life. The only function of traffic lights here is to entertain people in traffic jams. The role of traffic signs and only get kicked when people get road rage. In the past, since Schiller worked and lived in Gotham University, he basically relied on walking to go out. He never drove on the streets of Gotham during peak hours. When the car crossed the straight road and entered the turntable, a wave of cars passed, Schiller did not move, another wave of cars passed, Schiller still did not move, and when the cars on the turntable turned around, Schiller still did not move. Professor, are you going to? I mean, when are you going to go? I'm on the light, can't you see it? But, Bruce was speechless for a moment. He said, are you not familiar with Gotham's traffic rules? Of course not, I just read the Metropolitan Driver's Manual yesterday. But that's Metropolis, there's no such thing in Gotham. Then have you ever thought about? Schiller stepped on the accelerator and slammed the steering wheel. It's just because there is no it will be blocked like this. Bruce touched his ears and moved his body to the side. Eventually they gave up driving, climbed to the tallest building nearby, and passed by in the Wayne's helicopter. When they arrived at the mental hospital, Brand came out to pick them up. He was a fat doctor. He looked good-tempered and always smiled, but now he looked a little haggard. After he saw Schiller, he hugged him warmly. After a while, he shook hands with Bruce again, and he said, you guys are so early, I thought it was afternoon. We left in the morning. Because of this, I think you might be blocked until the afternoon, but I didn't expect it to be so fast. He said to Schiller as he walked, the advice you gave is really helpful. I feel that I am not here to cure sick, but when the judge comes to decide the case. How are the patients? Patient. Oh, patient, Brand said. Patients who can fill up 2 bottles of whiskey and smoke a whole pack of cigarettes after taking the medicine, they are very good. They even opened an order in the warehouse in the basement the night before, betting when I will leave. Schiller patted him on the shoulder and said, never mind, Gotham is like that. Brand showed a wry smile and said, if I had any other way, I wouldn't come here. Am I the same? Brand shook his head and said, the two of us are different. I'm hiding from the enemy, although you are too, but in fact, if you don't. Speaking of which, he glanced at Bruce, then shut up. Bruce's curiosity immediately rose, and it seemed that Dr. Brand seemed to know something about Professor Schiller's past. Okay, let's get to work, Schiller said. Brand pushed open the door of his office and said, I'm sorry you used my office. The facilities in this hospital are relatively old, so it's not bad here. The main problem now is that after the new police chief takes office, many prisoners who have been tried by him will need a psychiatric identification certificate, and many will directly reserve beds here. There are too many people and the ingredients are too complicated. The doctors and nurses here are too busy. Brand showed an ugly expression and said, you know, those people have a lot of trouble on them, and this week, the windows of the hospital were smashed 18 times, and at least a dozen people came in. Killers of different factions, 4 people died, one of them was a hapless security guard, not to mention those who were desperately transporting marijuana and high alcohol in it. It seems that the situation is not optimistic, but it doesn't matter, I can spend the whole winter vacation here, and there will always be improvement. Schiller said. Bruce couldn't help feeling a little chill on his back. Hello, help me transfer to His Excellency Godfather, thank you. Good afternoon, Godfather. I want to discuss a business with you. In the office of the Arkham Psychiatric Hospital, Schiller put down the phone. He tugged at the line, blew the dust off the receiver, poured himself a glass of wine, picked up the old-fashioned phone, dialed in a circle, and said, "Hello. Brand, you're in Hawaii. No, don't worry, take your vacation, I can handle it." After a while, Bruce came in and put a stack of papers in front of Schiller. Schiller said, "It's off work, do you want a drink?" "Thank you, I don't drink. You seem a little haggard. After all, I haven't slept for almost 50 hours. Of course, your new giant bat spotlight has been on recently, and all Gotham knows there's a Batman." But, Bruce sighed, he hesitated and said, "Have a drink, thanks." What can make Batman drink to relieve his worries? "I don't think I should do that," Bruce said. "The bat doesn't have lights and shouldn't have lights." Before Schiller could ask, Bruce said, "I've set up 6 bat beacons all over Gotham, and they've been on 25 times in the past few days, 19 of which are pranks. So, I designed insurance for them. After that, I received 12 requests for help, all of which were gangsters and asked me to support them. I didn't allow the gangs to use them, and they tried their best to destroy them. Of course, I designed security procedures, and it worked well. There were poor people and beggars to press them, and then the next day, they were killed by the gangs." Bruce covered his face, he took a deep breath, then took a sip of wine, he swallowed the wine with difficulty, and said, "No one is saved, and no one is allowed to be saved. If this is Gotham, I will say, well, I thought it was too simple. I knew, no bat would light a light," Bruce finally said. "I suggest you take a few days off. When you have a problem, sacrifice the rest time to solve it, and then you encounter a new problem, and continue like this. It's a vicious cycle, you have to stop, it's useless." Bruce said a little tiredly, "Okay, I'll go back to sleep, I'll come to work tomorrow, make copies of medical records, answer the phone, make rounds, whatever." The next day, Bruce did go to work on time as he said. Schiller was already sitting in the office, drinking a cup of steaming coffee. Bruce also made himself a cup of Americano and started to read with a paper. After the meeting, a female nurse knocked them in and said, "Doctor, Andre from room 5 on the 2nd floor has been arguing. He has been asking the nurse to increase the dose of morphine analgesics, otherwise he will complain to us." Without raising his head, Schiller said plainly, "Give it to him, 3 times the market price, and 5 times the price." Bruce nearly choked on the coffee. Bird on the 3rd floor wanted us to prescribe him a headache medicine, and he was having trouble last night. Tell him that the pill seller fell off the guardrail yesterday and landed on the ground. There is no stock now. The one in Ward 6. Schiller flipped through the file and said, "Hall is still Goyle, isn't there a way? Let him send someone in, and we'll deal with him." After the nurse left, before Bruce could speak, the phone rang again, and Schiller picked up the phone while looking at the file. "Hello, the whiskey is cut off." "Yes, the last bottle is with me." "Who said that he had a bar in his hand that day?" "Let me see. Number 1 on the 4th floor. Let him lead a line from the bar and tell don't fool him with parallel imports, or I'll give him a diagnosis sheet for permanent treatment recommendations." Schiller hung up the phone, then picked up the handset to dial, and said to the other end, "Tell them that killers will not be allowed to enter. To enter, they must have a gate pass, $100,000 apiece, $50,000 for the gate of the inpatient department, and an additional $30,000 for wear and tear on the 3rd floor and above. Buy a full package and send a security patrol map." Quote, "Hello, yesterday, the equipment department said that the brainwave machine was broken. Whose person is number 2 on the 5th floor? Old Bender in the East District. Donate a machine, let him take the person away, and come over to get rehabilitation advice later." After hanging up, Bruce said, "Professor." Before he could finish speaking, the phone rang again, and Schiller picked it up and said, "Hello. No deal. Tell him that the twin brothers in the South are asking for $500,000, and it's not a buyout. If he doesn't agree, then he doesn't even want to get a penny for the liquor business here." "Hello. No, Now the Falcone family is in charge of the security of the Arkham Asylum. If he wants to break in, let him come, and the Godfather greets him. Schiller just hung up the phone. Bruce saw the opportunity and said, "Is there something wrong with this?" "Hello, how many people will there be tomorrow?" No, that little vulture can't squeeze much oil and water. It's far worse than his father. Let him go to prison, I won't take here. He got his father's property. Well, ward number 7 on the second floor is reserved for him. What? A medical certificate. That's another price. Put off the remaining 3 until next month. Let the judge find a reason, diarrhea or something. There is no place on the 5th floor, and there is a policeman. Black police. Was discovered. We accept this mental illness. Intellectual disability is not accepted. If you want to come in, go to his old employer. Who else? No, he can't. Has been caught. Then let the police put the evidence back and look for the Brock. He will understand. When Schiller finished his work, when he looked up, Bruce was staring at him. His eyes were very complicated, a bit of, how could this be, shock, and a bit of, it really is, contempt. Don't look at me, the hospital is doing fine now, isn't it? But, Bruce opened his mouth. He wanted to question Schiller, but he didn't know where to start. I did a business with Falcone. He manipulated the black gloves to provoke some gangsters with oily water, and then let the police chief under his hand arrest people for trial. I gave them a psychiatric diagnosis certificate, and let them go to the hospital. As for the later, it depends on whether their owner or the enemy has paid more. Bruce stared at Schiller, and Schiller spread his hands and said, "What? It's incredible. Or do you really think I'm a good guy like Harvey? What makes you feel this way?" Bruce was speechless. In the next few days, Bruce watched as Schiller couldn't beat him and joined. No, not yet, but creatively created a new Gotham-style industrial chain out of thin air. His good professor merged into Gotham at the speed of light with a posture of never looking back and riding the dust, and he was better than blue. But Bruce couldn't say anything. In this perfect Gotham industrial chain, only the gangsters were injured. Consequentially, the gangs were cheated of money, the Arkham Mental Hospital quickly established order, the medical staff were also safe, and the various gang members in the hospital were even more obedient. When Bruce went to the ward round, he found that the boss of the gang would say thank you to the hell. They thought that Bruce was a doctor and could give them painkillers. Several gang bosses saw that he was close to Schiller, and they handed him cigar covers every day, trying to let Schiller let go and let them bring the thread in. Once, Bruce went to see a case with Schiller, and when he was resting, he heard the gang boss next door chatting. "Colt's a bad boy, a complete fool, he got his own absinthe, and he had the other house smashed, just to monopolize the liquor business here. He had a conflict with the twins. If you want me to say, he did it very neatly. After all, it is a big business of several $1,000,000. Really so many. The redhead downstairs made 20,000 yuan a week by selling cigarettes here. Who doesn't smoke here? Who doesn't smoke cigars? He can get good stuff from the wharf, and there are people who come in deliberately just to get this. A smuggling line. Room 2 has also made a fortune. Who knows that he had good luck and got on the line with His Excellency Godfather. Next quarter, he will have another restaurant. When the nurses come over, they put out the cigarettes. Be careful to anger those girls. They are all black widows under the hands of Mother Hearts." In the past few days, what he saw in this hospital gave Bruce a very complicated and tangled feeling. What would he do in his place, Bruce thought. He thought about it for a long time, and then admitted that he really hadn't come up with a more efficient and fair way. One night, Schiller was in the ward and said to a woman without feet, "It's not bad, the medicine is already working, and the excitement will disappear soon." The woman was lying on the bed, very calm, or a little numb, as if she couldn't hear Schiller, but Schiller said to herself, "There have been a lot of cases recently, but it doesn't matter, the psychiatric treatment is almost over." His voice was well suited to such a night, always with a calming power. When Schiller turned around, he found Batman standing behind him. Batman said in a low voice, "Why did she get transferred here? You cured this beggar's physical problems and completed the amputation operation for her, but she has some congenital mental problems and was sent in before." Schiller glanced at Batman. The corners of his mouth were always down, and he was always colder and sharper than during the day, making it difficult to approach. "You seem surprised. What? You don't think I'll just go with the gang, do you? What makes you feel this way? Batman remained silent, and Schiller ignored him, turned the head of the woman's bed down, and pulled the sheets up. Schiller didn't watch Batman, but asked himself, are you disappointed? For this city that doesn't appreciate it, for those who aren't worth saving, and don't let you save anyone. Do you think the Batlight decision was the right one? Batman's deep voice echoed in the ward. Schiller paused and said, don't be disappointed. The black sun is also the sun, and bats really don't turn on lights, but in the dark night, the lights that bats turn on are lights. www.mtlnovel.com. The cold light shines on the white bed sheets of the hospital, and Schiller leans over, flattened the corner sheets. Outside the window, the night in Gotham was still dimly lit. Schiller stood up straight and turned his head to look out the window. Batman saw that Schiller was facing the light, and the moonlight cast a long shadow behind him. Batman looked up, and he saw that on most of the walls and ceiling was his shadow, a pitch-black bat with pointed ears. The bat doesn't know how to light a lamp. He doesn't even have a lamp that can illuminate himself. There has never been a lamp in this world for him, and there has been no firefly for many years. But now, the bat still decided to learn to light a lamp, for the dark night here, for this incurable city. Batman also looked out the window, looking at the dotted, barely visible lights in the darkness. He thought, if this city full of absurdities, one day the sun will not rise again, then at least in the end. On the eve of the night, in this faintly lit cold night, there was still a lamp that he lit. A light that is useless and useless. A bat lights a lamp. Bruce never imagined that there would be so many unexpected situations in his internship trip. What made him feel the most tangled, of course, was his psychology professor Schiller. This professor doesn't seem to have only been in Gotham for a few months, but a native born and raised here. No, maybe most of the locals can't do this. Schiller quickly figured out all the rules of the city at a speed that even Bruce was caught off guard. Bruce once heard Gordon say that Gotham is like a big quagmire. Anyone who comes in will slowly fall into this inextricable quagmire. But Schiller, the professor who called himself an ordinary person, plunged into this quagmire in front of Bruce. Not only did he react quickly and move quickly, but he jumped into the deepest part, and he didn't even want to extricate himself. He changed his body and seamlessly became a bad person, worse than a bad person, from the staffing and geographical advantages of gangs, the protection fee standards of bars and restaurants, the odds of underground casinos, to the large-scale contraband trade. Rules, arms delivery security, dangerous goods smuggling routes, there is no such professor who will not. Falcone nodded to the advice he gave, and praised Schiller, who was born to do this. If he had come to Gotham 30 years earlier, Rodriguez would have had a seat in the 12 family. This complicates Bruce's perception of Schiller. You want to say that this professor is doing good deeds, but the means he used can no longer be called disgraceful, and he is simply complicit. But you have to say that he is doing evil, but he is indeed constantly leveraging the original situation of Gotham with his own abilities, and through some outrageous methods, the situation is changed in the direction he wants. And in Bruce's view, this change does not seem to be in a bad direction, but a very strange establishment of a shaky but better new order. Especially when Bruce received news from Gordon that the crime rate in Gotham had dropped significantly in the past 2 weeks, he even felt absurd. In this industry chain shaped by Schiller, the combat effectiveness of the police has been greatly strengthened, because they are in the same group with the Falcone family, the largest gangster in Gotham. Because the police chief was directly supported by Falcone, the Godfather provided them with a lot of heavy weapons, and they also used the Godfather's power to deter others. Now, wherever there is a gang fight, they can even arrive at the scene within 10 minutes, quickly suppress both parties, and then arrest them and throw them in a mental hospital. Different from the past, the enthusiasm of the police for work is too high. Now they even have to grab the opportunity to go out to work. As long as they can invest a full member in the mental hospital, they can draw 2 out of all the expenses for his hospitalization. Points as your own reward. Gordon has been so busy these days that even those 10,000-year-old water monsters are screaming to rush to the front line to fight for justice and fight against gangsters. Recently, this just police detective doesn't even know what justice is. Obviously, it should be a good thing to fight against gangsters so effectively, but he always feels that something is wrong. However, Such an action has both curbed the gangsters' arrogance, and the life of the police has changed for the better, making them fall in love with the job. Recently, Gordon was extremely shocked to find that now, there are people working overtime in the entire police station. Are they being controlled by some devil? Indeed, that is a devil called greed. He has a gun in his hand and does not panic. When you hold a heavy machine gun with plenty of ammunition and ask the gang to stop the fire, you will also feel that this job is nothing more than that. After doing this, and getting paid a lot of money, you will feel that this is simply the best job in the world. At the beginning, Falcone also needed to send his black gloves to provoke relations between certain gangsters and let them shoot and fight. But later, the anger was stirred up. Hyena and Captain united to block the Stealer 2 streets away, and the Locomotive on the edge of the Eastern District quickly joined the fight, 3 of the 4 giants on Elizabeth Street. Everyone wanted to help the place. Maroney, who had just digested the corpse of the Red Crow gang, happened to have a good fight in the chaos, and the entire Eastern District was a mess. Originally, the fire between the gangs killed a lot of people. When the fight was in full swing, the police rushed into the battlefield with heavy machine guns and bazookas. The gangsters were all stupid. Are we gangsters or are you gangsters? How can a police officer use a bazooka to enforce the law? In this way, one group of people were killed by fire and another wave was taken away by the police. The most powerful gangsters in the Eastern District were seriously injured. They didn't dare to jump out, and they all hid back to their hometowns to lick them. The wound is gone. The field team led by Gordon became famous in the first battle. All Gotham knew the violent tactics of these police officers. The armed pickup truck stepped on the accelerator to the end and directly entered the field. After the bulletproof shield was set up, the heavy machine guns swept away, and the RPG focused on the attack, all the way forward, and finally washed the ground with hand grenades. The most danceable gangsters in the Eastern District are all lying down. How can the rest dare to say anything? Although this is more about Falcone's face, after all, the old Godfather is willing to fully support the police, so he has all the reason and force. Ordinary gangsters don't want to pay such a big price to smear the old Godfather. Tiger Beard, who was willing to pay the price, was beaten by this sudden punch, and Gotham was so eerily quiet. All of this is because of an ordinary professor who had an epiphany one morning. Bruce thought that the professor had become the black sheep of a group of black sheep, who regarded him as a companion, but the enemy became the good friend of justice. Bruce really didn't know what to say about this kind of behavior. Of course, Batman is a genius, and after the initial struggle, he felt he had discovered a new possibility in Schiller's behavior. Originally, he always felt that fighting criminals should be fast, precise and ruthless, and that killing chickens should be done with a knife. But Schiller did not use this method. Whenever he attacked a force, not only did he not cut the grass and roots, but even at certain times, he would fertilize the force he had attacked before, so that the original force had already been cut. The poisonous seedlings that have been lost grow up again. Then use them as wedges to dismantle another intricate clump of vines. After Bruce saw the behavior, he asked Schiller that question again, and Bruce said, "Are you really just an ordinary person? Or is there some special, unknown power that can do all this?" Quote. Schiller was sitting in the office seat. He turned the ballpoint pen in his hand, then clicked the table, motioned Bruce to sit down. He said, "I'm telling you I'm an ordinary person. The point of this answer is not about me. Have you mastered some magical powers that ordinary people don't have? But I want to tell you that the most amazing power of human beings is their thinking brain." Schiller stood up and walked to the window. The white coat of the attending physician was on him, making him taller and taller. Compared to the stern-looking professor in the school, Schiller in the image of a doctor seemed calmer and gentler. He said, "The answer to this question is not whether I am really an ordinary person, but that, as I once warned you, your advanced armor and expensive equipment do not make you real. Batman. Because of the questions that bother you, the answers aren't in these foreign objects. And in our brains, as any normal person has. In fact, as long as you calm down and think about it, you will know that complete violence cannot achieve any of the conditions you want, whether it is revenge or saving the city. This is doomed to be a dead end." Schiller lowered his head and fiddled with the ballpoint pen with both hands, and then said, "Actually, the path you choose is a dead end, but if you don't want to die, you have to find a way to live from among countless dead ends. I just showed you one of the ways, but not all, not. Bruce said, isn't that enough? Isn't force, wisdom, and steadfastness enough? And Gotham, Schiller said. Quote. When will I learn Gotham? Maybe until you die. Before Bruce could speak, Schiller said, Gotham is a book that never ends. I'm just a professor. What I'm going to do, just like what I do in class, I've drawn the key points for you, and the test paper is for you to write. Bruce said, is the point about intrigue and checks and balances? Or, the power of intellect, thinking and vision? No, it's just like I do in class, the whole book is focused. Bruce was speechless. He didn't know whether Schiller was sarcastic that he didn't attend the class, or was implying something else. But Schiller's answer made him think about a problem. If using violence to stop crime in this sinful city is doomed to be whimsical, and if Batman's military and financial resources are not enough to fill the quagmire with this simple and rude method, then perhaps, put aside pure violence, use his other specialty, which is wisdom, would be better if he could manipulate all this behind his back. This city, which is full of countless violence, just cannot solve all problems with violence. Powerful force is only his stepping stone, but not everything. When he opened the door with strong financial resources and equipment, he met Schiller, the teacher, and Schiller showed Batman a brand new Gotham. A Gotham full of countless fogs and intricate relationships that put aside the violence, bloodshed, and violent conflicts on the surface. When Batman followed the veins inside the huge tree canopy, www.mtlnovel.com, to the deep roots under the ground, when he slid down the ravine of the iceberg from that corner into the icy sea, he finally saw to the true face of Gotham. It's a new world, Batman thought. But for him, this is not a setback and blow, but a stimulant. His brain has never worked so fast as it does today, and he never thought he had the ability to accept and sort out these complex relationships so quickly until he followed Schiller's every move. The thrill of gradually digging out a huge root system along the small veins fascinated Batman, and he experienced a stronger excitement and joy than punching a criminal with his fist. Perhaps, Bruce thought, this was the right answer. Perhaps, he is such a person, excited like a madman in the face of this complex problem that may make any ordinary person feel extremely desperate. This is him, this is the Bat. A paranoid, morbid psychic pleasure seeker, even crazier than the mentally ill the Bat. The changes in the Arkham Psychiatric Hospital have been watched by gangs of all sizes in Gotham. Not all of them are envious of this fat, but all the plans for Schiller were used by him to use the intricate relationships between the various gangs. The relationship broke down by taking advantage of the situation. Compared with Schiller, the gangsters that made Bruce feel very troublesome in the past seemed a bit unwise. The first way they thought of was assassination. They were very familiar with this matter, and even small gangsters could find out a killer or two. But the deal between Schiller and Falcone brought him unexpectedly lucrative profits for the Godfather. The Godfather is already old, and he is eager to leave more capital for his descendants. Therefore, the sudden and unexpected gain made him attach great importance. If this system can continue to operate, then the industry that Evans took over from him will be a little more stable. As a result, the entire Arkham Asylum was guarded by the Godfather, and Schiller was the object of his protection. For this reason, he invited the top security personnel at a high price. The irreplaceability of Schiller is that Falcone sees the possibility of creating a new order from him. If this professor really brings more new changes to Gotham, then the Falcone family will seize the opportunity, must be able to occupy the most important place in these new orders. Among the local snakes, the biggest one is going to kill Paul Schiller, and the other little snakes are basically helpless. Falcone has ruled Gotham's underground world for so many years, even if he is old, he is still alive. The gangster I had already hurt some vitality, and I couldn't be tough with this Godfather. Of course, you can't kill Schiller, you can also find a way to get him away and replace him with his own people. Not everyone has the vision of Falcone. They only think that if the person sitting in this position is for their own people, the profits here are astonishingly large. Even if they don't talk about the possible wealth gains from the rules created by Schiller, holding such a place can make their power expand several times overnight. They really didn't dare to face Falcone face to face, let alone take meat from the tiger's mouth, but it's still okay to make some small moves. Gotham's gangsters are also full of talented people. Of course, some of them are smart people. They found the president of Gotham University, Selden. Selden is also an unlucky old man. Originally, he wanted to recruit a few new professors to check and balance Schiller, but he did not expect that the newly recruited frozen man, Victor, not only did not agree with him, but also quickly became one with Schiller, not much. For a long time, the two became good friends who could talk about anything, and Selden's plan failed again. Before he was quiet for a long time, the gang came to the door again. Selden is an out-of-towner. He has no power in Gotham, but Gotham's rule is that you have to have at least one gangster standing behind you to speak with confidence. Selden didn't understand this, so he rejected those gangsters. The next day, he was shot on his way home from get off work. Those gangsters are still useful to keep him, so he didn't kill him, and when he sees those gang leaders in the hospital again, Selden understands Gotham's biggest survival rule: if you have a gun, you better have a better other people have more bullets, if you don't have a gun, just shut up and be obedient. Selden can justifiably call Schiller back to the school. After all, he is the principal. It is normal for the faculty members in the school to deal with any teaching affairs. If the professor refuses these normal work arrangements, it is him. It doesn't make sense. Selden made a random excuse. He thought it was okay if Schiller didn't come back, so he could just use it to trouble him. He was worried that he didn't have a reasonable excuse. However, the day after Schiller received his call, he came back with a very good attitude, and his actions were very timely. When Selden saw him in the principal's office, he couldn't pick out the slightest fault. Selden's excuse for calling Schiller back was just some chores like handling files. Schiller was working in the file room while remotely controlling the situation at Arkham Psychiatric Hospital. Selden liked being a cloud player staring at Schiller's classroom before, and after Schiller came back this time, he also used surveillance to stare at the archives. Then, Schiller let him really see what it means to have a simple and honest Gotham City. Over the next few days, Selden heard the names of the 12 biggest gang leaders in Gotham from the conversations Schiller answered the phone, and Schiller asked them at least 100 times in 3 days. Well, along with the name of the gang leader, it is either a noun for all kinds of contraband or some slang about smuggling locations. Among them, Selden was most terrified by the repeated references to manipulating the police, the judge and the jury in the conversation, as casually as discussing what to eat for the evening. On top of that, one day he heard Schiller put it mildly: if this mayor can't do it, replace him, he's half to blame for Gotham's bad traffic, since if you don't have the ability to be responsible for this, there will always be a life. Selden wanted to pack up and leave this city on the spot. Over time, Selden heard Schiller's conversations grow more and more outrageous, which began to involve some of the secrets of the Falcone family's fortune, including some of their secret smuggling routes, and their ability to plantation industry that brings huge profits. Selden became more and more alarmed. Although he is not a native of Gotham, he has been in politics in other cities for so long, and his political sense is sharp enough. At this point, Selden knew that Professor Rodriguez, who taught psychology, was definitely not just a professor. When an event is beyond the scope of human cognition, human beings will always use their associative ability to make it reasonable, and the brain will automatically search for various details in memory to support this inference, as did Selden. He thought, no wonder Schiller dared to give Bruce a notice of withdrawal. He had no fear at all. This psychology professor may be Gotham's biggest behind-the-scenes manipulator. He is secretly manipulating all 12 gangster families. Is the culprit of the current situation in Gotham is so chaotic. The more Selden thought about it, the more reasonable it seemed. After all, Schiller's amazing resume doesn't seem like an ordinary person's ability, and he can escape from so many murders perfectly, and maybe he has set up such a pattern elsewhere. Big net. Selden felt he was getting closer to the truth. Would he be alone? Or an organization? Who does he represent? What are you doing? What result do you want to get? Selden's association with these questions frightened himself. In his logic, Gotham gangs are so rampant that university professors will have connections with gangsters. There are relatives and friends who work in the gang, or they simply provide some professional services for the gang themselves in exchange for safety and some extra money. But that's not the reason why a professor can contact Gotham's biggest gangster family at the same time and get involved in the Godfather's secret business. The most evidence of Selden's conviction is that Schiller's tone on the phone is not like everyone else's that way. being both fearful and flattering to the gang. His tone was always calm, as if everything was under control, and Selden could tell that he was controlling the gang, not the gang controlling him. Selden felt like he was in huge trouble, and Schiller had the ability to influence Gotham's biggest gangster, but he chose to continue teaching at Gotham, even though he seemed to take the position very seriously. From Selden's point of view, look, he has such great ability, why not go to the rich area of Gotham to buy a villa? Why are you still crammed into a faculty apartment at Gotham University? There is only one possibility. It is profitable for him to stay at Gotham University, or there must be something Selden doesn't know that is attracting this crazy professor. Yes, to Selden, Schiller was a total lunatic. Gangsters aren't docile little quails, especially the biggest gangsters in Gotham. The evil in this city is almost overflowing, and everyone who has been floating in this sea of evil for many years is almost infused with evil itself. They can stand on the top of the waves in this environment and become the top of this dark city. The trendsetters, and working with any of them is tantamount to scheming with a tiger. But Schiller, he's not only working with them, he's working with all of them at the same time, or he's even trying to manipulate them. Selden, who had just seen the ruthless gangster, would of course think Schiller's behavior was crazy. It's like cutting the deadliest wire among hundreds of tangled wires. If you cut it wrong, this pack of bloodthirsty wolves will swarm up and devour such a daring person. Net. Selden was starting to regret it. Wouldn't it be better to keep Schiller in Arkham Asylum? He finally got out. Why did he bring him back? It's as if he finally threw a time bomb out, and somehow picked it up himself. Up to now, Selden is praying frantically in his heart that Schiller's activities must not happen. If something happens, don't affect Gotham University. Even if it affects Gotham University, don't affect it. However, you reading www.uikonshu.com, Selden can get to where he is today. He is still a bit quick-witted. He knows that this will not work. He must take action. One morning, Schiller went to the archives step by step, intending to work remotely while fishing. As a result, as soon as he arrived, he found that at least 2/3 of the unfiled files were left the day before, and they were all sorted out. He checked with doubts and found that all the work was indeed done. What's happening here? And the conch girl? However, the work was done, so there was no need to stay here any longer. Schiller walked down with some doubts. As soon as he came downstairs, he ran into the headmaster Selden, and Schiller raised his hand. The coffee greeted him. Selden had a dark face, and walked over without saying a word. Well, Schiller thought, it seems that the principal still doesn't like seeing him, but he's used to it. After all, since he sent Bruce the notice of withdrawal, the principal hasn't given him any good looks. But the only strange thing is that the spirited principal who usually likes to dress himself up looks a little haggard today, with 2 big dark circles under his eyes. Schiller was called back by the principal. Even if he could remotely control it, he actually needed other people to manage the large and small affairs of the psychiatric hospital. This task fell to Bruce. Schiller threw all the work directly to Bruce with great confidence. Bruce always felt that the professor had more confidence in him than he had in himself. He is only a freshman, and is about to take over an atypical psychiatric hospital in his first internship. In this psychiatric hospital, although there is no real mental patient, he is more dangerous and more dangerous than a mental patient. Trouble. When Bruce questioned his suitability for the job, Schiller told him, "Sometimes you don't know you're a genius unless you push yourself." On the first day on the job, Bruce had a big problem. He couldn't tell who was who here. Although he has memorized all the patient files as thick as a book, memorized all their names, room numbers and corresponding medical records, if this is in a general hospital, a trainee can do this level, is completely sufficient. But unfortunately, there is no mental patient in the traditional sense. Behind their names and medical certificates, there are extremely complex social identities. Who is a member of which gang? Which gang has a bad relationship with which gang? Who and who used to be enemies? Who and who are partners? This information cannot be seen from the cases. When he listened to Schiller talking on the phone in the past, Bruce probably heard some things. His far superior memory made this information into his novice gift bag. He couldn't understand everyone's social identity. It didn't matter. Some clues are pushed back. On top of that, Bruce is good at disguising, just as he does the disguise, and in this hospital, he's become a big-hearted, pampered but yearning for gangster life. The status of the richest man in the world has provided him with a lot of benefits. Generally, no gang member thinks that the richest man in the world will deliberately set his words on him. Therefore, when Bruce shows interest in the story of the gangster, the gang bosses just think the young rich man, just like the rich man's son, has lived a comfortable life for too long, and yearns for the exciting life in the gangster movies. Therefore, although they added a lot of their own fictions when telling stories, Bruce can still infer real and useful information about gangster social relations from these stories. In a city where almost everyone has something to do with gangsters, after figuring out the complicated gangster relationship, almost all the connections at the bottom of the city are clear. Bruce found that the city's survival laws were more complicated than he thought. Starting from the bottom gang, even if it is a small gang with only a dozen people, they have their own rules of survival. These little gangsters often undertake the business of patrolling the streets and petty theft, and they also pay protection fees to the bigger gangsters for them to drive. The bigger ones are gangsters with hundreds of people. These gangsters are the mainstream of Gotham. Most of them have one or two industries in their hands, which may be shops or factories. They provide protection for these industries, expel those who are looking for trouble, and remote control the small gangs under their control to solicit customers. When some conflicts over competing for customers arise, they will also have small-scale disputes, but they are basically hiding in cars. 2 shots were fired from the back with a pistol, and few large-scale firepower was used. Further up, there are big gangs with a number of hundreds of people. These gangs have reached another level. Each of them has at least one special industry on which to survive. Bruce found that these gangs are still there. Industry segmentation is achieved. At the scale of hundreds of people, they often control at least one smuggling chain or have a complete industrial chain of planting, refining and sales, or they control the vast majority of industries in a red light district. A monopoly is achieved in a certain industry in a region. Reaching this level, the profit they can grab every day has reached a rather astonishing level, and it has also produced saturation. Going up, it can no longer be called a gangster, but should be called a family crime group. The 12 gangster families that rule Gotham, except for the core force in the hands of their talkers, actually do not have any businesses that require hands-on work. What they have to do is to remotely control these big gangsters. Each gangster family has dozens or hundreds of big gangsters, in charge of different businesses in different areas. When Falcone established the 12 families, he gave them 12 different industries to focus on. Falcone, on the other hand, stands at the top of the pyramid, giving orders to all families and gangs. In the collection and analysis of this information, Bruce found that Gotham's seemingly chaotic rules are actually a fairly solid pyramid, and wealth is extracted from the criminal industry layer by layer, and then from the top to the top, for redistribution and production. In this cycle, Gotham has developed its own unique ecosystem, forging the largest concentration of crime industries in the United States. At the same time, Bruce found that, unlike what he imagined, from the perspective of sociology and economics, the industrial structure of the city is still healthy, whether it is the distribution of industrial volumes at various levels or the so-called division of industrial clusters, even better than the vast majority of cities in the United States. As the investigation deepened, Bruce began to doubt his original intention a little bit, because he found that although Gotham is evil, it is not poor, and the living standards of the people are not low. In addition to being very dangerous, the people here quite rich. In the process of traveling in the United States, Bruce also studied the living standards of people in major cities in the United States. He found that the living standards of the vast majority of people in Gotham, the city, were far beyond the pass line. During his visit to the hospital, Bruce met an old man from the city who was called Rifle Gun. Rifle was originally going to rush to the city, but his daughter married Gotham and married a small gang leader who was maliciously framed, and his daughter almost suffered misfortune. Rifle, directly carrying an old-fashioned rifle, rushed to Gotham, and killed the gang members who wanted to frame his son-in-law with a few shots. The Lauren family, one of the 12 families, took a fancy to the old man's temper and his good skills, and now he is the owner of a restaurant in the west area of the Lauren family. Unlike other gang members, this old man really came to the hospital. He had a long-term headache, which seemed to be a complication of anxiety, so his son-in-law found a relationship and sent him in for treatment. Much better already. It's the same everywhere, it's the same everywhere. Rifle smoked a cigar, leaned against the hospital bed, and said to Bruce, "Where do you think you'll get better by going to the city? Everyone lives on clean streets, every house has a car to drive, the children are you all wearing school uniforms to go to school." He took another puff of his cigarette, and the old man even had the air of a southern nobleman, like a real rifle. Accompanied by the smoke, he slowly recalled, "When I met Mary, you know, it was decades ago. At that time, I was a poor boy, and I was running around the city with my bare hands. There are also gangsters in the city, where is there not? I work for them, but it's not as good as Gotham. I earn too little, sometimes I don't even have a cent in my pocket. I want to marry Mary, but I don't have the money. How do we get married? So, I took a gun and started a killer business, which made my life a little better. When my daughter was born, I was already doing a good job. Although I haven't read any books, I want to see, Gotham is a lot stronger." Bruce said, "Gotham is better than rushing to the city." If it wasn't for an old man who seemed to be quite knowledgeable, Bruce would have thought he was out of his mind. "I know, you guys with serious identities think this city sucks, there are gangsters everywhere, and everyone is a criminal, but for people like us, it's just as hard to work for anyone. If there is more money, we will go with whomever. In Gotham, as long as you are a full-fledged member of a gang, you can actually make a lot of money, and like me, if you can own a restaurant or a bar, it's no different from running a big business. And here, the members of the gang are actually safer. There is a set of rules here. If you don't want to declare war on a gang, it's best not to touch his people, even if it's just a gangster at the bottom. So, those who join the gang to support their families are actually safer than other places, because the gang has the final say here. You become a part of the gang, and it's easier to speak." I know. Rifle put down the cigarette and said, "I know very well that the killer is going to be punished. I will go to hell, there will be Satan's judgment waiting for me, but I don't care, you know why?" Before Bruce could answer, Rifle said to himself, "I need to fill my stomach first, make more money, and live a better life. God didn't let me be born into a family with the same food and clothing as you. My father lost everything in gambling. My mother ran away with someone else. My only possession is an old gun that is not very smart. Then I think, I just did it, what can I do? After I came to Gotham, I realized that the person who built this city must be a genius. Don't you think these gangsters are well planned? It even reached a perfect balance, allowing the city to be able to. It went on for a long time, and people were doing just fine. What's the name of the one under my son-in-law's hand? Forget it, we all call him One Hand. His left hand was cut off by his father, who was drugged and brain-destructed when he was a child, but I have been working with the casino owner on their streets since I was a child, specializing in throwing dice. I even bought a car last year, and I will get married next month. The gang industry is huge, and they are short of people. As long as they have hands and feet to work, they will accept anyone. Children don't go to school, they can learn a craft in gangsters. If they have some brains, they can go to restaurants to work in restaurants and learn how to cook with the boss, or go to bars to learn bartending. The most powerful ones are those who can learn skills in casinos. Those are some naturally clever ghosts. If you are agile, you can become a pickpocket. If you have good eyes, you can watch the wind and watch the wind. The worst thing is, you can learn how to fight with other people. There are so many gangsters, restaurants, bars, casinos, garages, or if you need employees, or you need security, you can eat anywhere. As far as I can see, the economy has been better in the last 2 years. If I save more money, I can even buy a small independent house on the edge of the rich southern area. Oh, you should live in the center of it, after all. They say you're a very rich man. My grandson is not as lucky as you, but it's enough, he's better than me. At least he was born in a house that won't leak, and his mother takes good care of him, and his father is outside making money. We're doing pretty well, right?" Perhaps it was because the headache was much better. The old man seemed very energetic and kept reciting some details of his life. At this time, Bruce's thoughts drifted far away. A word from the rifle made him think. Gotham's crime industry planning is perfect. It's almost impossible to form naturally. Gangsters are born out of chaos, they can't everyone organize these industries spontaneously. So how did the city get into the weird shape it is today? Could it be that someone really designed it like this on purpose? What is his purpose then? He has the ability to plan the industry chain so perfectly, so why does it have to be turned into a crime capital? Can't you do something else? Gotham is simply the biggest flower in all the cities in the United States. www.mtlnovel.com. It has been running smoothly for so long in a bizarre twisted posture, and it has become the most prosperous street on the East Coast. One of these cities, in an extremely outrageous way, has rushed to the forefront of urban GDP in the United States, and people's living standards are not only passing, but also excellent. His creator must be a genius. He wrote order out of disorder, creating a new mode of urban operation almost out of thin air. But at the same time, he must be a lunatic, using his crazy creativity to create the world's largest city of sin with his own hands. Bruce thought, maybe here, genius and lunatic are only separated by a thin line. Gotham is like a coin standing between them. It seems as if it will fall at any time, but to this day, it is still swaying on this line superior. Everyone here, like this city, is two-faced, a genius with a special talent, and an unparalleled lunatic. The genius is on the left, the lunatic is on the right, and everyone in Gotham has the same traffic rules as here. I am going straight, and I will never turn. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.